Can you try your mic? Let's just make sure that one's working.
Yeah, she already tested mine. She said it was fine.
Point, if there are any petitions to speak, Mr. Trainer?
Not on items not on the agenda today. We have a couple.
How about any other requests for speaking tonight?
Yeah, I
Anybody
think the
else?
requests are for work session items,
Or-
so I would advise
Yeah.
you to take comments now before you sort of take them up later as work sessions.
Yeah, if we have,
Sure. So for either work session item, we're hearing comments right now? Okay. First, we have Mary Chavez, speaking on T-zones.
yeah, just to clarify that our two main items this evening, the small area plan and the T-zone, those are going to be work sessions, so we won't have any public hearing on those items tonight, but otherwise, we always welcome people to speak before the Planning Commission, so please proceed. Yeah,
Thanks.
and it'll be 3 minutes.
Okay. Mr. Chair and members of the commission, my name's Mary Chavez, and I don't think my time's up. 215 Lawton Street. In your discussion on T-zones this evening, I encourage the commission to focus its attention on two areas. First, the staff changes that differ somewhat from the commission's recommendations. And second, council comments and requests for further work. City staff have accepted a number of the commission's recommendations delivered to council, but differ from the commission recommendations in the following areas. No progress has been made in re-examining the proposed recommendations, in re-examining the proposed allowable by right commercial uses, with staff basically endorsing virtually any retail use. Instead of making all commercial uses on Park Avenue conditional on council approval, staff would permit 4,000 square feet of commercial per lot by right. This could increase the likelihood of commercial on Park rather than smaller housing structures. The height, setback, and coverage recommendations made by the commission following the 11th hour pressure from a key city developer have been included in the staff recommendations, despite that developer now pursuing a project under current T-zone rules. Unfortunately, staff have not reflected the comments of the arborist, who would reduce building and impervious coverage and increase conditional setbacks to assure light and space for adequate tree coverage. Staff would expand the proposed ban on residential to all of North Washington Street. This is inconsistent with the new intent for T-zones, which specifically cites both residential and commercial uses. Based on the prior city attorney's views, staff have not included the commission's proposed TIF district to collect taxes for affordable housing citywide. Council has asked for further work in several areas, including consideration of unit size caps for townhouses, further consideration of the merits of one or more T-zones, exploration of options to buffer multifamily mixed use from T-zone projects, exploration of the feasibility of reducing maximum allowed heights, providing stronger protections for historic properties, and seeking a second opinion on the TIF from the new city attorney. I believe all of these issues merit discussion and input from the commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other speakers, Mr. Trainer?
Yes, Quinn Nguyen, who submitted to speak on the East End Small Area Plan.
Very good. Welcome.
Hello. Okay. Last time I spoke too close to the mic, and the live stream sounded awful. Does this sound okay? Yeah. Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Quinn Nguyen. I'm with Viet Place Collective. It was really great to see some of y'all at the recent pop-ups at Eden Center. And as you might predict, my comment is about the East End Small Area Plan. On behalf of VPC, I want to thank the planners for incorporating the recommendations from our community into the plan, and you all, the commissioners, for inviting us into this planning process and giving the revisions your consideration. We want to emphasize that our recommendations have come from months of research and countless conversations with business owners and community members at Eden, and we've really been encouraged so far by how collaborative this process has been. Moving forward, we'd love to continue open and transparent dialogue for the best outcome for not just the Viet community, but for the people of Falls Church and the greater area. We ask you to continue supporting the economic and cultural vibrancy of the Vietnamese community. We also ask you to focus on two sections in your review: tax funding and the anti-displacement programming, and investment in the small businesses. Is an opportunity for the city to capture the economic impact of a center that holds decades of history. And we understand that the city stands to gain a lot from developing the area. The city also stands to lose a lot if the correct measures are not taken to protect the businesses from being priced out by this development. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Alan Frank, who's here to speak on the East End Small Area Plan as well.
Good evening. I'm Alan Frank. I'm here on behalf of Eden Center. I have about an hour's worth of things to say in 3 minutes, so I'll get right to it. The plan is generally fine with us, generally fine. There are some things in there that, in the sense that the plan really won't take effect unless we file a rezoning application sometime in the future. We'd never intend to do that. I want you to know that we intend to keep Eden Center there forever if possible. It is our plan not to redevelop Eden Center. Now, if we ever did it, if the Eden Center just failed as a business and we had to do it one day, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, there would be a rezoning application and there'd be something else built there. But between now and then, we are only going to improve it. We're going to keep our good tenants there. We love our tenants. We've been doing this for 40 years. We know how to do it well, and that's why it's so successful today. With the plan is a couple of things we don't like, and mainly, we need to run our business. We can't have this plan impact the way we run our business over the next who knows how many years. There's a talk about displacement. This body, and I don't think the City of Falls Church can even change the way landlord-tenant laws work in the 6700 block of Wilson Boulevard and make this plan different than every other small area plan which doesn't have any kind of displacement. We handle the tenant, we are full. Eden Center's full. We plan to keep it that way. If there is a rezoning application filed, then I think there will be a huge discussion about displacement, and there should be. And we would welcome it at that time. I really don't have anything further to say at this time. I think there will be opportunities to talk about details in the plan. I also have the name. I do have some trouble with the name Little Saigon East because it's the little city, and there's Saigon East, and there's Saigon West, and it's confusing. We have created a brand called Eden Center, and it's taken 40 years to do that. And I think if we call it something else, it's going to be very confusing for people. So we would like to just keep it Eden Center. And that's our plan, and that's how we plan to keep it. The Viet Collective, I've never met them. They've never come to us to collaborate about this, but we would welcome it if they called us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Pirooz Kamalek to speak on T-zones.
Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Pirooz. Am I on? Yeah. My name is Pirooz Khan Malik, 609 Park Avenue. I'm the owner of the T1 zone property at the corner of Park Avenue and North Lee Street, and also a resident of the city, and also have been a taxpayer in the city for 25 years now. And although most of these T1 parcels have the option to go through B zone and through Z zoning to B1 and special exception, but I believe these changes to T zone would encourage the property owners to build a project at a smaller scale than what the B1 would allow if the SUP process is done expeditiously. Knowing that the shortage of the housing has become a reality and is increasing, I'm encouraged to build a project that would include a new home for myself and create an opportunity for others to buy a fine home at a great location. Having said that, I'd like to mention a few issues that I hope will be discussed and resolved. One, step back. I'm talking about the top step back. Although some step back may be a good idea on a street facing residential districts, knowing that these days houses are built much taller than they used to be. But it is not necessary if the frontage faces institutional and or commercial buildings, especially if the property is located next to a tall mixed-use building, in my case, North Lee Street. Requiring setback on these streets will make the aesthetic of the new building to be not in harmony and proportional to the existing tall building next to it, and that's something that must be considered for attractive transition from high density to low density. Number 2 is the SUV process. By approving the zoning changes, city is approving certain types of projects like townhouses on the infill T-zone parcels that are less than 1 acre with certain requirements. I understand the city would like to have control over what exactly going to be built on these parcels, but it is not necessary to have a long SUV process and repeat what the site plan will have to do anyways, including review by the staff, review by the Planning Commission, Architecture Advisory Board, public hearings, and more. Number 3, parking. Staff is recommending 2 parking per home for townhouses. Does this apply to townhouses with 1 car, 2 car, all the townhouses like 2-car garage, 1-car garage, and possibly townhouses with no garage at all? Thank you.
Thank you.
And next we have Aaron Flynn, speak on the East End Small Area Plan.
Welcome.
Hi, Erin Flynn, 222 Little Falls Street. I just wanted to take the opportunity to commend the Viet Collective for all of their work and also to thank the staff for sort of the sensitivity at which you've sort of brought to this since the last planning session. And again, to thank the Planning Commission for sort of hitting pause on this and actually doing the work that should have been done up front to bring the community into this plan. And I wasn't planning to speak, but I guess since Mr. Frank is here and brought up some of the issues surrounding kind of what could be done in the city with respect to the Eden Center, I did want to show that as a community member and resident, you know, I support you as the landlord taking efforts to improve the infrastructure at the Eden Center. From what I understand, the businesses there are paying, you know, some of the highest rents in the city. You know, they're almost fully occupied, and it seems like with the, you know, money that the landlord is getting, that there could be infrastructure improvements, you know, that you're making instead of the tenants really like coming to the city for those efforts. And I support, you know, a tax sort of finance district. I was here in January talking about a tax finance district, but it's also your obligation as a landlord to make those improvements for tenants. And one thing I noticed when I was over there, that even the front gate at Eden Center is crumbling, and it would be nice as the landlord for you to make a commitment to really, you know, do that work to ensure that the kind of respect is given to the community there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the speakers that have signed up to speak tonight.
That's all we had. Okay, thank you very much. All right, I think we can move on to our rules of procedure. This was deferred from our last meeting. So, Mr. Stoddard, did you want to introduce this one?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. I'm happy to introduce it, and then I will flip it over to Mr. Jack Trainer, who's been our lead on this. But the request for you all tonight is to take an action to formally adopt these as your revised rules of procedure. This is something of a procedural item where you all review these each year. It's the guidance by which you conduct your meetings. Of course, there's state code and city code that sets your sort of limits and your obligations. But the rules of procedure are really about how you're going to conduct your business and conduct your meetings. There are several revisions that I'll allow Mr. Trainer to walk through, but just to remind you, the request tonight is for you to review and act on them. And of course, staff's recommendation is to adopt the proposed changes. Mr. Trainer?
Thanks, Mr. Stoddard. And yeah, to reiterate that, staff has prepared this common response table based on the discussion that the commission had at its work session back in March 15th. So I'll just kind of run through the couple line items here. So beginning on this first column here, staff had, sorry, it sounds really loud. Staff has included a clause in the rules of procedure stating that the Planning Commission that the agenda meeting for the Planning Commission will be uploaded to the city website by close of business the Thursday before the next Planning Commission meeting. The Planning Commission also requested a clause that commissioners and the public will be notified of agenda updates. Staff has edited that language in the Rules of Procedure document. Let's see, the most recent Rules of Procedure version from January 27, 2021 has also been added to the cover of this draft Rules of Procedure. And lastly, Planning Commission requested language that considered that all zoning-related financing matters come before the Planning Commission, and language has been added addressing that as well on line 90 to 91. So following that table, just the lines in the Rules of Procedure have been updated to reflect what lines that they're on now. I'll also point out that I think this was discussed a little bit before, but to highlight that staff has added language that was included in previous versions of the Rules of Procedure, but fell out, so have been re-added about clarifying that the Planning Commission delegates to the Planning Director authority to approve applications for lot line adjustments that do not create new lots. So if there's any comments on that, Mr. Stoddard and I can address them.
Okay, thank you. I'll open it up to the commissioners for any comments or questions. I suspect, Mr. Krasner, you might have a comment?
Yeah, I have a comment, well, a question, I guess, related to the lot line adjustment issue. And I know, just so we're clear, in city code, it says that we may delegate it. And the question then becomes, I'm concerned that the phrasing in there is too broad, saying when it doesn't create a new lot, because there are examples of where someone adjusts a lot line and, turns a situation. And again, I use this example just because it's the most recent and it's the most present, or most at the forefront of my mind. But the proposed subdivision at the corner of Lincoln and West, which was not technically creating a new lot. Now, I don't know why that one did come to us, but that one, technically it's two lots, but what they're doing is they're reorienting the lots to go from two skinny lots, essentially parallel with West, to, or what they wanted to do. I don't know what will happen there in the future, but to doing it 90 degrees the other way. And so in that case, technically there were two lots, and in the future there would be two lots. But by doing that, they're essentially turning it from a situation where you have practically one lot today, and it would be, but the way they would do it, it would be now they can have two houses there. And so I guess I'm concerned about a blanket delegation. Truly there are, the word minor, for lot line adjustments is inherently a subjective term. There are certainly minor adjustments. People are selling a little sliver of property to somebody. They're moving a lot line of 1 or 2 feet over for various reasons. I mean, those things do happen. And certainly I would agree those are minor. But the other example I gave, I don't know if I would say that's minor. And I'm concerned about not having any knowledge of that or oversight of that. I think in our planning reports, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we are, maybe after it's already happened. I mean, I think we are informed about administrative approvals, but I guess I'm concerned that the way it's worded, that it's just too broad. And I don't know maybe how we get at that. I mean, it's because it's hard to know every iteration or circumstance that might come up. But I'm wondering if there's a way we could be made informed in advance, and have the opportunity to perhaps, call up that item or not, or otherwise, if we don't exercise that ability, then it defaults to being administrative. But it gives us the opportunity before the decision is made to call it up and have a public hearing on it. So that's my combination of questions, comments, suggestions, but I wanted to open that up for my colleagues to, think about that. And again, I'm not saying this doesn't happen often, but there are examples of things where people are just shifting a lot, but it has a lot line, but it has a major impact on what can happen there. So,
Any commissioner reaction or comments to that?
I'm curious if Mr. Stoddard could tell us how often those requests are made, lot line adjustments?
It's funny, we had, and I guess you're right, this Lincoln application was, I guess, a lot line adjustment. There were sort of two non-conforming lots, and they were sort of dimensionally, what was proposed was conforming lots, although staff had made a negative recommendation on the subdivision, citing that the, one of the lots was unbuildable. So I think in recent, they come in, I guess, waves. So most recently, we've had two lot line adjustments where you had two conforming lots before the application that were developed, and there was no new construction proposed, and you had two conforming lots after the lot line adjustment. So one was actually resolving a non-conforming lot dimension where the rear yard setback was not large enough, and they actually purchased sort of land from the neighbor to the rear to make both yards conforming. So I guess in total, it's probably 3 or 4 a year. I don't think it's, on staff, I don't think it's particularly high cost to bring them all to the commission. I think this is an authority that existed under previously rules of procedure. I think staff mistakenly suggested taking it out a few years ago, and then we realized what we'd done. Certainly, we can bring all those applications back to the Planning Commission. I think the impact on the applicant is that it's probably a slightly longer time to review and a slightly higher fee that they pay at the counter. But certainly, it's something we could do.
Okay, Mr. Krasner, I think I'd ask you whether that resolves the issue, or would you still like to have, since it's only 3 or 4, I guess from that perspective, it's not a burden, but as Mr. Stoddard mentioned, it could possibly delay.
well, yeah, you're right. I mean, I guess you could look at it both ways when you say it's only 3 or 4, in the sense that, right, it doesn't really increase our workload. You know, I could understand doing this, you know, obviously there's, you know, an efficiency argument if there are dozens of these and they are truly, you know, ultimately a perfunctory administrative exercise, and, you know, we wouldn't need to have people go through the process, and it would clog up our agenda. And so, you know, so that would, I certainly wouldn't want to trigger, you know, that type of a change. But if it's only 3 or 4, you know, like and I don't know if there's some middle ground where, like I said, we can be made aware that somebody's requested that or applied for that, and then have the option to, I don't think anything precludes us, right? I mean, couldn't we be given the option? Couldn't it be listed somehow somewhere on our agenda, and we could have the option to vote to call it up for a hearing?
We could. I generally don't like to put things on your agenda unless we've had staff review on them, and so I've been thinking through sort of the mechanics of this, right? Ideally, we'd bring it to you early so we know which track to put it on, but I wouldn't want to put it on your agenda until we've actually reviewed it, and then we're sort of in a sense sort of bringing it to you for action anyway. Mm-hmm. One thing that might right, the situation on Lincoln was different in that there were non-conforming lots underneath. Right. And so that might be something that we could sort of peg this to, that instead of being so broad as to say, look, you started with X lots and you're ending with X lots, therefore you're fine, we might be able to sort of craft it to say, you know, so long as there are no sort of new conforming lots, right? Because you can't build on a non-conforming. So you might sort of be able to work something around sort of the conformity of the lots.
Perhaps, yeah. It's hard because I know there, you know, the kind of situations that would probably where we might have a consensus here that we'd want to hear it are probably going to be the outliers. I mean, I agree with you. It's probably going to be the anomalies, and it's hard to craft an ordinance that's going to capture those anomalies.
Would another option be, since the chair goes over typically with you, Mr. Stoddard, on a meeting basis, going over the agenda, would it be something that you could cover with the chair and kind of maybe make a decision as to whether it looks like there's something there that should be brought to the attention of the commission as a whole?
It might put the chair in an awkward spot because essentially it's the commission delegating an authority to one member. So that.
I was kind of hoping you would be kind of obvious enough to, but I trust your instinct there.
Yeah, I think generally whenever a body delegates an authority, I like it to come before the whole body before that delegation's made.
Can I just make a suggestion?
The
suggestion.
highway?
I'm
Go
just
ahead.
looking at the language that's up there on bullet A, and just delegates approving authority to the planning director to approve such plots following appropriate review by other city departments. It also could be appropriate review by the planning commission, and then you could state that, Paul, in your director's report, that when these come up, you actually make that part of your director's report. Right? They're going to come, like 4 may come up a year. You go over a lot of stuff in the director's report, but just making sure when these come up, that it's at the top of your director's report to let us know that one is in the pipeline, and then we can have a brief discussion about it, and probably half of them will just say, yeah, Paul, go do it, and maybe 1 or 2 of them, Brent will say, yeah, let's review that, and then we do. So maybe having language about putting that on your director's report in the statute here.
So they'd be treated more like information items to the planning commission, but staff would still have the authority? I mean, as far as delays, we meet twice a month, so I don't really feel like that's a huge issue personally. And I don't know what the cost difference is to the applicant, but if you said it's slight, then hopefully it's, although, I don't know, I guess if we're talking about it being an information item, maybe there is no cost difference anyway.
Well, there's when we take in the application, there's a different fee. If it's a lot line adjustment, I think it's a nominal fee, and then if it's an actual subdivision application that has to, that sort of triggers these sort of reviews, then there's a higher fee. And I don't have the fee schedule up in front of me, but I think it's something less than $100 worth of, versus something that's several $100s. So it's probably a several $100 difference. And we typically, mechanically, we don't start wheels sort of turning until we accept an application fee. So I think we could sort of chart, I'd have to look that up. But I think the idea of I think we could adjust this language to do, as you said, Commissioner Hyra, to say, we could include all such applications in a planning commission packet, and the planning director couldn't proceed until after the commission had a chance to review it in the meeting. And just to clarify, so the expectation wouldn't be a presentation from the applicant. They're not expected to bring their engineering team and sort of walk through the plan with the commission. Sort of a staff briefing on it would be enough.
I think that's right. Does that seem reasonable to you?
That seems reasonable. I thought of another question. I mean, is lot line adjustment, you said you differentiate the fee based on lot line adjustment. Is that defined in the ordinance? Is that term lot line adjustment defined as opposed to subdivision? Because some places define any moving of any lots as technically as a re-subdivision of land, even if you're not creating new lots. So do we define lot line adjustment?
Yeah, it's worked out in the fee schedule, so you're correct. The subdivision ordinance doesn't differentiate between those two situations, so they all come under the heading of a subdivision application.
The reason that's important, of course, is because, on the last one, I mean, I hate to keep on going back to that example, but I know there were questions, actually, one of the potential, that property, I don't even know what the current status of that one is. One of the people who were looking at that contacted me and, was raising a lot of issues and actually was arguing that point with me, but whether or not it was a subdivision and they would trigger the need for things like sidewalks, other infrastructure that get triggered through the subdivision process, but not through not through like an infill redevelopment. So anyhow, I don't know if that's straightened out anywhere because it's not just semantics; it's an important point. So maybe we can look to clean that up too in the order. I don't know if we can't do that through this process tonight, but staff to look at that, cleaning up how we define that. Because I could see somebody trying to argue that, well, I'm not subdividing; it's just a lot line adjustment.
Yeah, we can double check the language. Practice has been staff has always treated those as subdivision applications, and so we do have precedent there that anytime anytime someone asks to move a lot line, we treat that as.
And that's that is the common practice. I agree with you 100%. But since the terms aren't clear, and we're differentiating, as far as fees and process.
So where did we leave that? Did we leave this to put this in the director's report?
I mean, I'm fine with that. I mean, I guess we can always do it as a trial, right? Can't we try this new process for a period of time? And if we think
A year
it
from
needs to
now,
be
we can update our rules again?
tweaked or even sooner, I mean, there's no limit. We can change our rules of procedure at any time, right? I mean, we don't
Yeah.
have to wait a year
Can.
if we feel like it's not working one way or the other. But I mean, I'm certainly fine to try it that way and see if, and to hear how staff feels it's working as well, of course.
You okay
So-
with that, Mr. Stoddard?
Yeah, so I think the request is to insert the language on at the end of, I guess, line 110, where it says other city departments, and after the proposed lot line adjustment has been shared with the commission during a regular meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say in your director's report.
Okay.
Regular meeting in the directors. In the
Sure.
director's-
Yeah, we could,
That's-
yeah, we could specify that.
Okay, any other comments on either that or any other of these issues? That being the case, Mr. Kresnit, would you like to make the motion?
I'll make the motion. I'm going to need help reciting what we just said if we're going to put in the text of the rules, but of course now I just lost my page here. Give me a second. Okay. All right, well, the motion's pretty simple. As staff did it, we're going to have to tweak it. So, all right, I'm going to move that the Planning Commission adopt the rules, the revised rules of procedure as amended, but with the following additional amendments. I don't know,
Do you have that?
I wasn't taking notes, so does staff want to dictate what you just said, Mr. Stoddard? You kind of just said that.
Yeah, I think it would be that line 110 be amended to read other city departments and shared with the planning commission as a director's report item during a regular meeting.
And do we want to say something about what happens? I mean, do we need to say what we're going to do? I mean, you're going to share it with us, but then we need to say whether or not, at that point, we'll decide whether or not we're going to delegate it to staff for administrative approval or not. Do we need to clarify that in the rules?
In
Probably.
advance of any decision to delegate?
But we're making the decision to delegate. I don't know. I hate to delay this item, but maybe we need to. I don't know if we can do it right now on the fly, because I feel like we need to have a process where that makes it clear what we have to vote. We need a majority to agree to make a motion to vote to hold a public hearing on it as opposed to delegate it, right?
Yeah, I am trying to avoid creating an action item inside the director's report.
And that's the issue, because what do? You give us the report, but unless four of us sort of agree, I mean, that we can't do anything. So. And that's how it should be. I mean, it shouldn't just be one person who says, I want this called up. It would need to be the consensus, so.
Would it be like a consent item unless there's agreement amongst everybody? It would go on our agenda?
Do we have a consent agenda? Do we have something like that? I don't know if we have something like that.
Well, I said like a
Yeah,
consent.
no, that's exactly it could work like that, but we don't have that.
Well, I guess this is my concern, is that we're sort of creating, what we're sort of doing is sort of inviting sort of a conversation on it. And so I think because I think if it's called out as an agenda item, I think it invites conversation, right? That's the whole point of putting something on an agenda. And then, if there are sort of interested groups coming out, we're intending to do this sort of early in the process before staff review is completed. And so I think if it's going to be anything other than sort of a not an informal conversation, but sort of making the commission aware, I think the safest bet is actually to strike this and then just sort of bring them all to the commission, because I think anything other than a complete package is sort of awkward to have on the agenda.
But if in your process of the director's report, if you describe a particular situation and somebody on the commission has a concern with that, it's probably going to want to go onto the agenda for a future meeting, right?
Well, but I mean, I just think we need to have a process because, again, we're a commission of 7, and if 1 or 2 people feel strongly that it should come up, but the other 5 say, actually, no, I don't think so. I think we need to, it needs to follow, I think, those rules because otherwise, we're not following, I think, an orderly process. So as a consent agenda item, as you mentioned, we don't have that, but a consent agenda is just like that. If no one flags it and says, I have an issue with that, it just sails through without discussion. But I don't think our rules of procedure, we don't allow for that, right? We don't have anything we approve that way. Some boards do, and some governing bodies do things that way, but we don't. So we'd have to invent that. So I don't know so I mean, maybe you're right, Mr. Stoddard. It might just be simpler to have them all come to us at this point, and then if that proves to be onerous or we feel like it's not working or there are complaints from the public or staff, we can maybe adjust. But if it's only 3 or 4, and I know some years it might be less than that, and some years it could be more, but.
So the resolution on that would be just to strike that item.
We're kind of removing our delegation of authority. If we
Yeah,
ever
you
did
would-
that, I don't know if we ever voted to do that because the ordinance says we may do it. I don't know if we ever affirmatively voted to do it in the past, but do you
Yeah.
recall, Mr. Stoddard, if we ever actually made an action to do that?
Well, we voted on the West End to,
Right, so there
Change
was,
the
so
site
you,
plan.
so prior to, up until a few years ago, that authority was just, that was in the rules of procedure, that there was that sort of blanket sort of passing of authority to staff. We removed it a couple of years ago. When we realized what we'd done, we started bringing each of those to you for your sort of consent to carry them out administratively. We've done that on a few applications since then. And then, but I think if what the commission wants to do is not sort of recreate that, then I think the motion would be to strike what's proposed, the proposed additions in lines 104 through 110.
does anybody have a problem with that? Sounds like that's
Do you have
where
the
we've
attachment,
landed,
Chuck?
and when we all get tired of looking at these at some point in the future, we can come back and change the rules.
Right. If it proves to be tedious and cumbersome,
Then
we
we'll
can-
blame Mr. Krasner. And,
you can blame me and we can change it. But well, let's see how it goes. I mean, and
Thank you for your attention to this, by the way. So, I
Yeah,
appreciate
and I don't know. It seems like a small point, and I swear it's not just because of that one lot, like near my corner. But it's like, I know we've had other adjustments too that I think are, I've seen them get approved, and for the most part, I think staff does a fine job reviewing those. But, I think that we have so few that perhaps it's better to have things come to us. All right, well, fine. So
we'll-
with that, I got halfway through a motion, but I'm going to start over again. Then, so I'll move that the Planning Commission adopt the revised rules of procedure as amended from staff, but with the following additional amendments. And as Mr. Stoddard just said, I'm going to propose that we delete lines, where was it? 104 to 110 of the draft document. And other than that change, everything else seemed fine. So just with that one change, deleting lines 104 to 110, I move we adopt the revised rules of procedure.
Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Trainer?
Ms. Friedlander,
Yes.
Mr. Krasner,
Yes.
Ms. Comont,
Yes.
Mr. Hyra,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens.
Yes.
Right, the rules of procedure as amended have been adopted.
Okay, next item is the electronic participation policy review. Mr. Stoddard?
Let's see. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. This is sort of a companion document, and following the advice of the city clerk's office and the city clerk, what we've brought before you is actually separating out your electronic participation procedures. Previously, those have been included as part of your rules of procedure, but given the recent legislative changes that have been happening with remote participation, the clerk's advice was to remove these and make them a separate standalone document. That's what we've prepared. You all had reviewed these previously as a work session item. I'll turn this over to Mr. Jack Trainer, who's been our lead planner on this one.
Sure, thanks, Mr. Stoddard. There's no updates to the staff report or to the policy since the last work session. Also on March 15th, 2023. I guess as a reminder, commissioners are allowed to participate remotely or petition the rest of the commission to participate remotely under a couple different buckets or reasons every year for doing so. That includes temporary permanent disability, family medical condition, the commissioner's physical residence is more than 60 miles from the meeting location, or for a personal matter. And as a reminder that when citing personal matters for participating remotely, commissioners are allowed to claim so up to 25% of the year's meetings. And so that's the kind of crux of the remote participation policy.
Okay, Commissioner Coman, since you got to trial this at the last meeting, did you have any observations? Did this work okay from your perspective?
Worked just fine from my perspective, yeah.
Very good. Okay. In that case, I'm very comfortable with it. If someone would like to make a motion.
I'll go ahead and move that the Planning Commission adopt the Planning Commission remote participation policy dated March 15th, 2023.
Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Friedlander on the second. Mr. Trainer?
Okay. Ms. Friedlander,
Yes.
Mr. Krasner,
Yes.
Ms. Coman,
Yes.
Mr. Hyra,
Yes.
and Mr. Stevens.
Yes.
Okay, the remote participation policy has been adopted.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to the minutes. First set of minutes are from March the 15th. I didn't have any proposed changes. Does anyone like to make any changes? No? Everything look okay? Would someone like to move to, well, actually, I think we can just do that by acclamation. So all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Any abstentions?
I'll abstain. I wasn't here that day.
Okay, one abstention. Otherwise, minutes are adopted. Second set of minutes are from April the 19th. Anyone have any edits or?
I had one thing. In the Pearson Square Amendment, the vote did not include Mr. Hyra's vote. I believe he was in the meeting and he voted for the Pearson Square Amendment, but he's not listed in the table.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You were listed in the first table. And with that change, I move that we approve the minutes for the Planning Commission meeting on Wednesday, April 19th.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second, Mr. Krasner. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Seeing none, the minutes are adopted. All right. With that, let's move into our work session items. Just kind of remind everyone that we're not having any public hearings on this item this evening, so this is pretty much a discussion with just the Planning Commission and staff. And so with that, the first item is the East End Small Area Plan. I'll just kind of say at the outset that in January, the Commission recommended that we take more time after the listening session, to get input from the larger Vietnamese American community associated with the Eden Center. Given that the usual methods that we've used in the past for small area plans to get community input really needed to be augmented for this location. So staff took that challenge on, and I think they did a great job in coming up with a series of pop-ups, kind of taking the issue and the conversation directly to the heart of that particular small area plan area. So I congratulate staff on that effort. With that, Mr. Stoddard, did you have any preliminary comments that you wanted to make?
Yes, I'm happy to introduce the item before I turn it over to Ms. Emily Bazemore, who's been our lead staffer on this one. Just to set the procedural items here. So as folks probably remember, you all had been reviewing the draft chapters as they were being developed. When the first complete draft was reviewed was back in September of 2022. And since that time, that draft plan has been reviewed and commented on by all of the city's boards and commissions. It's been the subject of an electronic survey. It's been shared at pop-up events at the farmers market and obviously most recently at a series of pop-ups on site at the Eden Center. And so what you have in your packet tonight is a revision to that September 2022 draft that now incorporates all that guidance and all that feedback and input from all of those different methods for community engagement. It is a lengthy set of updates, but that's very deserving given the breadth and depth of community engagement and the time since the plan was last, the draft was last revised. In terms of using your time tonight, what I would suggest is maybe about a 20-ish minute presentation from staff to allow us to walk through the major highlights, the major changes, as well as the community engagement that has taken place. And then as we get into the conversation on specific chapters, and we can talk about this as well under the director's report, you actually have an open meeting agenda at your next regular meeting. So if there are specific items that you want to carry forward or you want to have a deeper conversation on particular items, there is time available at your next meeting as well. The next time this is scheduled to go to the council is at their May 22nd date. We're still looking to figure out what that agenda exactly is going to look like and whether this is going to be more of an update or more of a work session. I raise that just to say that whatever that agenda ends up being, you all have 2 meetings before then if you want to use both of them. But with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Bazemore.
Ms. Bazemore.
Good evening, Planning Commission. Nice to see you guys. Tonight, the Planning Commission is requested to hold a work session to review the revised draft East End Small Area Plan. City Council is scheduled to review the revised draft during their May 22nd work session. The plan has been revised to incorporate input and feedback from the community received through the community meetings, pop-ups at the farmers market, and most recently Eden Center, the public listening session, and the survey, as well as input and feedback from the city's boards and commissions. Notable updates to the draft plan include a revised vision statement and goals that focus on the Vietnamese culture at the Eden Center rather than the structure itself, an anti-displacement toolkit in the economic development chapter. Number 3, strategies that focus on the recognition of the Eden Center area as Little Saigon East and placekeeping measures for the neighborhood. A concept for a hotel, cultural center, and/or flexible plaza space and parks to support visitors to the Eden Center. And finally, strategies that support the revitalization of Fort Taylor Park. Updates since the January 18th public listening session. The Planning Commission last reviewed the draft small area plan during its January 18th, 2023 listening session and work session. During the work session, the Planning Commission recommended that staff conduct further community engagement before revising the draft East End Small Area Plan. During a City Council work session on February 6, 2023, staff presented a plan for further community engagement through 4 pop-up style events held on site at the Eden Center. Now I'd like to skip to page 16 of the staff report. Just want to give a little overview of how our pop-ups went. I encourage you all to read our pop-up report. It gets into methodology, specific feedback from the pop-ups. It's very detailed. It's a great report. City staff hosted a series of pop-up events at the Eden Center for the East End Small Area Plan during the following dates: March 18th, March 22nd, March 29th, and then April 22nd, the most recent. During the pop-up events, the planning team used in-language interactive boards, some of which you can see here, with questions relative to the Eden Center area to prompt responses relative to the current state of the area, need for improvements, and hopes for the future of Eden Center. The questions were the following. First question we asked was, what does Eden Center mean to you at pop-up number 1? We also asked, how do we celebrate Vietnamese culture at Eden Center at pop-up number 1? At pop-up number 2, we asked, what would you like to see improved about the Eden Center area? And finally, at pop-up number 3, we asked, what is your hope for the future of the Eden Center area? In addition to our interactive boards, during pop-ups number 2 and 3, the planning team displayed a tabletop activity depicting the whole POA, it was an aerial map, and various additions such as trees, added parking, and many other items that could be moved around the aerial map to signal where these items could be ideally located to improve the area. At the table, the planning team provided in-language anonymous comment cards at the pop-ups with the question printed, what can the city do for you? Visitors to the pop-up could fill out the comment cards at the booth, or they could take a card and return it later. Finally, the planning team also did some door-to-door outreach to businesses during the pop-ups. This outreach ensured staff had the opportunity to converse with business owners and workers alike that otherwise may have not had the opportunity to make it out to our pop-up booth. An interpreter accompanied planning staff for this door-to-door outreach. Some key themes of feedback, again, this is going to be in the pop-up report as well, where more parking is needed, improved parking options, additional safety and security measures are needed, support for changing Wilson Boulevard in the city to Saigon Boulevard, support for branding the area Little Saigon or Little Saigon East, adding a traffic light at the gate, and support for green spaces. Cleanliness needs to improve, particularly the bathrooms, and ultimately ensure that the Eden Center remains. For the fourth and final pop-up, the planning team presented the updated vision statement, which I'll share with you guys in a minute, updated goals, as well as the key themes of feedback collected throughout the pop-up events, and corresponding strategies addressing these themes of feedback. The comment card box was also available at our final pop-up. Now I'm going to hop back over to page 4 of the staff report. Awesome. So now we're going to start to review some of our revised draft chapters. For chapter number 1, this is our introduction and background chapter. It discusses the authority of a small area plan. It discusses the history of the planning opportunity area. And it also gets into past planning guidance and studies. I'd like to note that the revised plan includes the East End Transportation Study completed by Nelson Nygaard in 2022. Chapter 2 is our concepts chapter. This is the chapter that contains the vision statement and the goals for the East End. The draft vision statement and goals have been refined based off of feedback from the community at community meetings, pop-up events, the listening session, the survey, and boards and commissions meetings. The revised vision statement and the revised goals aim to promote equitable planning in the East End of the city. The revised vision statement is the following. The heart of the East End is the Eden Center, a cultural hub that serves as another home to many. Vietnamese culture is celebrated through placekeeping, preservation of businesses, and the establishment of the cultural district, Little Saigon East. Transportation investments put people first by prioritizing connectivity and accessibility. Green spaces provide opportunities for community members to gather, recreate, or relax. A green approach to infrastructure building and site design supports the environmental sustainability of the area for future generations. Nearby housing affordability is preserved as complementary new commercial and residential development responsibly occurs within the East End. Equitable planning is at the forefront of reinvestments. Our revised draft goals are the following. Number 1, preserve and promote the Vietnamese cultural identity of the Eden Center. Honor Vietnamese heritage through culturally respectful design and placekeeping. Celebrate local Vietnamese history through programming and investments at the Eden Center. Uplift the people and culture by prioritizing the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Number 2, enhance multimodal mobility and accessibility throughout the East End, invest in safe connections to ensure equitable, safe travel opportunities amongst pedestrians, cyclists, transit users, and those personal vehicles. Number 3, activate public spaces to create community connections, strengthen the sense of community in the East End by providing spaces for the public to enjoy and gather, incorporate green spaces to blend nature into the urban environment. Number 4, preserve and expand housing opportunities in and around the East End. As the planning opportunity area develops, preserve the quality and affordability of nearby housing, provide design transitions between existing housing and new development, create housing that is accessible to a variety of household sizes, ages, and a range of incomes. Ensure that affordable housing serves and supports the East End community. Number 5, support economic investments throughout the East End. Prioritize anti-displacement strategies to promote the longevity of small businesses in the Eden Center. Invest in the East End to create and maintain consistent economic activity. And finally, goal number 6, develop the area in an environmentally sustainable way, consistent with the principles of stewarding the area for the benefit of future generations. Chapter 3 is our land use and zoning chapter. The land use and zoning chapter provides guidance for reinvestment in the area by suggesting land use and zoning changes that support the overall vision for the East End, while also documenting the existing land use and zoning conditions. On the next page, you'll see our revised land use map. This is our proposed land use map. So the revised proposed future land use map shows the following changes. Civic and green space along Wilson Boulevard and Roosevelt Boulevard, paired with the hotel use supporting the Eden Center. Green space located along Wilson Boulevard in front of the BJ's Wholesale, paired with new retail. Fort Taylor Park is identified in a darker green color to distinguish it from the nearby Oakwood Cemetery, and also a greenway along the northern portion of the POA. Node 0 is our green spaces and our open spaces. A goal of the East End Small Area Plan is to create greener walkable streets and introducing plazas and parks for quality public spaces. The revised draft plan notes that Node 0 comprises areas throughout the East End with the intention of doing the following: creating those green walkable and bikeable streets, creating a permeable surface that could flex between serving as parking or a public plaza at the Eden Center, pocket park space along Wilson and Roosevelt Boulevards, planting green roofs and spaces for gardens, particularly a Vietnamese community garden, incorporating spaces for children to play, revitalizing Fort Taylor Park for community use, and advocating for the continued recreational use and the respectful enjoyment of the nearby Oakwood Cemetery. Node number 1 is our 24-hour fitness and Kuhns node. The 24-hour fitness and Kuhns Ford sites occupy node number 1, totaling approximately 10 acres. Redevelopment of the 24-hour fitness site in conjunction with either the Kuhns Ford site or adjacent properties in Fairfax County holds the opportunity to create a town center style development in the East End. The revised draft plan recommends that residential uses should serve the existing community, so affordable and senior housing should be encouraged in this node. Node number 2 is the Eden Center. The Eden Center, a cultural anchor for the Vietnamese American community, occupies node number 2. The revised draft plan presents a vision for node 2 that uplifts the Vietnamese culture at Eden Center, explores placekeeping efforts, and improves core existing structures. The plan suggests the following for node number 2. Preservation and expansion of the core existing structure, repairs and maintenance should be prioritized. Opportunities for public parking should be explored, flexible ground level community space or plaza space, a cultural center for the Vietnamese community to utilize, a boutique hotel that would cater to out of town visitors to the Eden Center, and a cultural celebration overlay for Little Saigon East. Node 3 is east of Roosevelt. So the land area east of Roosevelt, where BJ's Wholesale and Public Storages comprises node number 3, the revised draft plan advocates for the following. In the event that infill does not enter the Eden Center site, a boutique hotel that would cater to out-of-town visitors to nearby Eden Center as well as that cultural center, complementary retail to the Eden Center, so targeting local Asian-oriented businesses, residential mixed use that incorporates affordable housing, green space in front of BJ's Wholesale, and in the event of redevelopment on site, a food hall or maker space or perhaps a business incubator space in the current BJ's Wholesale area. 2 new strategies have been incorporated into land use and zoning. Strategy number 1, rezoning applications for this area will be considered on a case-by-case basis. Applications should support the goals that are stated in this plan. Strategy number 2, establish a cultural celebration overlay in partnership with the Vietnamese community and the Eden Center property management. The neighborhood would be called Little Saigon East. So chapter number 4 is our economic development chapter. It's been revised to better represent the economic goals for this area, which entail working to preserve the Vietnamese culture of the Eden Center by emphasizing culture and placekeeping and anti-displacement measures and supporting economic reinvestments in the area. The economic development chapters begins by detailing existing commercial uses and providing an employment profile, reviewing the history of Vietnamese business displacement and the rise of the Eden Center, and finally documenting recent reinvestments as well as land values, property taxes, and business taxes. The revised chapter introduces economic development strategies for the area. They're split up into different sections. The following sections are the anti-displacement toolkit, number 1. Number 2, Little Saigon East, placekeeping, marketing, and branding. Number 3, future reinvestment in the East End. The anti-displacement toolkit contains the following strategies: reinvesting tax money for a legacy business conservation program for the Eden Center. Number 2, providing technical assistance, educational, and counseling opportunities for businesses. Number 3, supply resources for how to find and apply for loans and grants. Number 4, enhance existing buildings. Number 5, hire a Vietnamese-speaking outreach specialist. Number 6, establish a list of registered community organizations. This would be maintained by the Vietnamese-speaking outreach specialists. Number 7, encourage studies that explore history, culture, and anti-displacement. Number 8, Eden Center Chamber of Commerce are establishing a small business alliance or peer advocacy group. Number 9, leveraging special exception SE criteria to enhance community benefits and promote cultural preservation. And number 10, establishing or promoting construction disruption assistance. The Little Saigon East placekeeping, marketing, and branding section of the economic development chapter details various strategies that outline the opportunity to establish the East End as a singular, cohesive neighborhood focused on Vietnamese culture. This section of the revised plan contains the following strategies. Number 1, establish Little Saigon East. Number 2, rename Wilson Boulevard, the section in the city, to Saigon Boulevard. Number 3, Little Saigon East marketing and branding. Number 4, pursue historic designations. Number 5, arts and culture focused placekeeping. And number 6, heritage tourism. The final section of the economic development chapter of the revised plan is future reinvestment in the East End. This highlights reinvestment strategies that will continue to support economic vitality throughout the East End. The following strategies are included in this section. Number 1, invest in infrastructure. Number 2, business ownership opportunities. Number 3, repurpose or infill underutilized parking lots. Number 4, encourage complementary uses and spaces. And number 5, focusing on community engagement during application reviews. Chapter 5 is our character and urban design chapter. It documents existing conditions within the East End. This chapter includes strategies to enhance aspects of urban design, beautify existing spaces, and overcome challenges associated with them. It introduces the following additions to the planning opportunity area to create vibrancy and instill identity through thoughtful design in the East End. Streetscape architecture that honors Vietnamese character, parks and plazas, gateway features, wayfinding, public art, honoring history through design, block size, building height to street ratio. The revised chapter includes a section on Vietnamese character, suggesting the following strategies that would correlate with the Little Saigon East neighborhood. Maintain the iconic Eden Center symbols, such as the clock tower and the gate. Actively seek out and welcome new Vietnamese and Asian American business opportunities into any future retail spaces in and near Eden Center. Park improvements near Eden Center should be influenced by Vietnamese design, include appropriate native vegetation, cultural art, or maybe a history walk. Reinforce cultural identity through basic design elements such as decorative sewer lids, bus stops, murals, lamps, and building architecture. This chapter also includes a section on Fort Taylor Park reinvestment. This section organizes park reinvestment around the following opportunities: clean up Fort Taylor Park through city and community collaboration, install picnic tables or benches at the top of the bluff to serve local residents and visitors, commemorate Civil War history and ties to Thaddeus Lowe's balloon rising. Number 4, increase connectivity between Fort Taylor Park and the greater East End area. Ensure that park entrances are ADA compliant. Number 5, develop a park master plan for Fort Taylor Park. And number 6, address erosion and stormwater issues along Broad Street's frontage during future park reworks. Number 6 is our multimodal and connectivity and accessibility chapter. It recommends future investments that would deliver on the goals of this plan to reframe the East End as a vibrant, multimodal, and accessible area. Actions and strategies captured in this chapter follow the following themes. Number 1, create a grid of streets and greener paths. Number 2, pedestrian connectivity and safety. Number 3, bicycle infrastructure and parking. Number 4, transit service and bus stops. Number 5, Metro Rail first mile, last mile connections. Number 6, automobile parking. And number 7 is thinking forward into the future. Public engagement at the Eden Center highlighted the importance of on-site parking to out-of-town guests and business workers and owners, and concerns about safety and lighting throughout the parking areas. The revised chapter suggests the following strategies to aid in parking at the Eden Center. Maintain existing parking for the Eden Center while looking for options to expand shared parking options through structured parking, and increase safety in parking areas by ensuring adequate lighting and increasing visibility. Chapter number 7 is our last chapter. It's our environment and utilities chapter. It begins by outlining existing conditions related to topography, urban forestry, water supply, sanitary sewer, storm sewer, and electricity within the East End. The latter half of the chapter introduces strategies for the planning opportunity area that center around climate action and mitigation and infrastructure reliability, both of which are key themes as the area redevelops in a time where climate change is prevalent. This revised chapter includes the following additional strategies: incorporate native plantings in the area. For green space at or adjacent to Eden Center, plantings native to Vietnam should be incorporated. Number 2, urban agriculture. We included in this section recommending planting a Vietnamese community garden adjacent to the Eden Center. Number 3, incorporate engineered green spaces such as stormwater collection ponds, where placemaking could occur alongside stormwater management. The revised draft chapter also includes a new section on recycling and composting. This section recommends strategies for both the residential and the business community in the East End to promote sustainability in their day-to-day activities. These strategies include: number 1, provide an additional opportunity for recycling. Number 2, encourage composting in the business and residential communities. Number 3, promote the use of reusable materials. And number 4, explore technical assistance opportunities, providing education around sustainable green business practices. The rest of the staff report highlights our community engagement. I'm just going to flip right through it. It highlights, our community meetings, our farmers market pop-up, our community survey, the listening session, again, those Eden Center pop-ups. I just wanted to go to the very end of the staff report, the very last page, line 592, 500, sorry. 500. Yeah, okay. Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. 592. Having a moment. So we're at the Planning Commission work session right now on May 3rd. Just wanted to highlight that we're going to City Council for a work session, hopefully on May 22nd. And then we're scheduled to come back to you for tentative action on June 7th. And then City Council action, again, tentative action June 26th. So just wanted to make sure everyone is aware of those dates. Again, they're flexible and they're tentative. And that's all for my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for going through all of that. Obviously, a lot has happened since January. I just wanted to reiterate a comment that Mr. Stoddard made, and that is the extensive nature of the of the materials. I know I got through them barely, but I have probably some more time than my colleagues to do that. So I'm anticipating that we'll probably need our next meeting to kind of carry over our discussion to provide feedback to staff, which we can, of course, start out tonight. I thought what I would do first is start out with Mr. Puente's comments. He couldn't be here this evening, but he took time to write, I think, some good comments here. So let me just share those for the benefit of my colleagues. I found the revised East End small area plan greatly improved. I have some minor comments on the plan below, but obviously the main task is to put in place effective anti-displacement policies and practices. I found the toolkit very strong. I generally agree with the community comments that they would be stronger if not included as part of the economic development chapter, though I don't know where else they would go. Are localities in Virginia allowed to enter into community benefits agreements? If so, I would suggest we consider including it as an element of the toolkit. Or is the approach that the special exception process on pages 4-10 of the draft plan serve the same purpose? I quite like the idea of the neighborhood business incubator. Could we include a strategy that focuses on partnering with related cultural organizations outside of Falls Church, since Eden Center is a regionally significant business? Should the hotel mentioned on line 251 to 253 of the staff report be included in the proposed land use map on line 188? On line 311, I like the idea to rename Wilson Boulevard. I would support renaming the whole thing, since that same road runs through Arlington's Little Saigon. Line 534, I am not a branding expert, but Little Saigon is common for Vietnamese enclaves across the country. In the case of Northern Virginia, I wonder if the term is associated with a displacement from Arlington and therefore negative. I understand that adding east is to distinguish Falls Church's East End. It strikes me that Eden Center is a novel, unique, and successful brand. Transportation chapter, page 6-6, says the area's primary customer base is outside the convenience range of automobile alternatives. Is that based on attachment 2B, East End Small Area Plan Community Survey Report? Page 6-9, is the Nelson Nygaard Transportation Study available for review? And page 6-19, is there a need for special treatment for tour bus parking? So those were the comments of Commissioner Puentes. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I can. That was a lot of different comments. So if you could provide those over email too, or in writing, so we can make sure we have them.
I'll provide these to Mr. Trainer, and he can include them.
Yeah, they were great comments. The Nelson Nygaard study, that is the East End Transportation Study, and we can absolutely provide that as an attachment in the future so everyone can take a look at it. Has some great recommendations. It talks about that parking structure potentially at Eden Center. The CBA, that from what I've seen in my research as well, is allowed in Virginia. Paul, is that correct? We had discussed that preliminarily when we first started drafting the chapters. So over a year ago, when we were looking at, outlining for economic development, and I agree that it has very strong points that perhaps maybe leveraging our SE criteria does not have. So I was also thinking about, could that be an additional strategy in the land use and zoning chapter? It's not something that we've ever done in the city before. We would need to research more about, I think, the pros and the cons and have like an internal discussion more so about that. But it is something that we've seen in comments and we've heard in discussion, and it is something different for the city of Falls Church. But there's this opportunity to negotiate specific community benefits for nearby residential, or in this case Eden Center, in the event of redevelopment. So prioritizing what like different community groups and the folks out at Eden Center would want to see. So
we'd have to take a look, as Ms. Bazemore said, we'd have to look at sort of the legal allowances or limits on community benefits agreements. That generally something that's attached to a zoning process. Council can't defer that authority to another group. I think where the council has been successful is in negotiating community benefits through the special exception process. That's why we tried to reference that in the plan. That's how we've gotten sort of business access agreements and parking accommodations, and then support for sort of existing tenants. And so I think there has been sort of a range of benefits that come with those VC packages. So that mechanism we've tested and used successfully in the past. I think other methods, we'd want to make sure we're on solid legal footing before bringing those forward.
Okay, thank you for that. Why don't we open it up to the other commissioners at this point? Would anyone like to share either comments or questions?
Well,
Mr. Hyra?
I have a bunch, but I just wanted to make
Jump
one micro comment based on the community benefits agreements. I worked with an organization, 1DC, that struck the first community benefits agreement in Washington, and that was in 2007. So it's new, but they've been happening all over the country. Just like tax increment financing has been happening all over the country. And I think we need to distinguish our capacity to do these things versus a legal requirement. Can we do community benefits agreements here in Falls Church? Absolutely. Can we do tax increment financing districts in Falls Church? Yes. Have we done them? Not very often. Do we have a lot of experience doing them? No. But we just need to distinguish between legalities and capacities. Those are separate and different, and I keep hearing them getting mixed up. People feel like, well, we don't know if we legally can do these things. We absolutely can. And they've been happening all over the country, all over this region, in Washington, in Virginia, in Maryland, and elsewhere. So that was just a small comment that I really wanted to hit on. All right, now I'll go into my broader comments, if that's okay. I first want to start by complimenting the planning staff and the city for doing all of this outreach. It's tremendous when, Ms. Bazemore, I heard your very thorough update and where the plan is now versus where it was 6 months ago, a year ago. It's changed substantially, and you all need to be commended for that. You have brought together different areas of the city, like advocacy groups that are here today, or an advocacy group, and also a representative of the owner is here. That wouldn't have happened, I don't think, unless the outreach and the pop-ups and this continued dialogue that we've had with the East End and with people across the city. It's tremendous. So I want to compliment you all on that. But then I want to kind of take a pause and, not pat everybody on the back and kind of say, this is great. We've got a lot of language here. But I've seen a lot of equity plans with a lot of beautiful language, with a lot of research. But then the question is, do we have the capacity to execute and implement? And I would say, like all the anti-displacement strategies, that's great, but they're going to take money. So, and we kind of have the language in there like incentivize, encourage. I say we take that out and we put implement anti-displacement strategies. And then we have real specifics about tax dollars that we are going to allocate from the tax dollars we already collect. The comments that were sent into the city had actually how much tax revenue is generated in a single year from the Eden Center. We could already start to allocate that money, if we wanted to, politically, for anti-displacement strategies. Because to stop displacement, you got to start early, right? Like you look at a low-income community, you got to start doing home ownership initiatives to keep people in place before the gentrification wave hits and crashes, because if they're renters there, it's too late for them. So like the small businesses that are now, and the representative, the owner, talked about nothing's happening yet, nothing's going to happen. Something is absolutely happening. This plan is happening. This will start to get interest on the private sector. We also in this plan have rezoning that, yes, the developer can choose to trigger it, but just the fact that we are planning to rezone could potentially change the land value like that. So, and also, we haven't even talked about, and I mentioned this last time, all the other things that are happening all around the Eden Center. A lot of investment is coming in, not Falls Church investment, but Fairfax investment, Arlington investment, that is affecting the property values where the small businesses sit in the Eden Center. So we need to take all of that into account, and we should be, as a city, doing anti-displacement strategies now with the tax revenue that we are getting from that area, and maybe with some of the tax revenue we're getting from around the city. So this idea of encourage, incentivize, no, we should have implement and execute with the tax dollars we already have. Mr. Puentes mentioned that, we thought that there was going to be a separate chapter on anti-displacement strategies. I don't know if that's sufficient. He mentioned that, and, we were kind of expecting that, and I was like, where is it? And then it was in there, though. So I don't know. I'm pretty happy with the way you did it and integrated the anti-displacement strategies in a couple places. Another comment I wanted to make is that you presented a lot of revisions based on the pop-ups and all the feedback. Some of that was in the plan, some of it wasn't. The revisions that you shared on Chapter 2 on the concepts, I noticed that the chapter that's in there did not reflect what's in the staff report. So I guess you revised some of it, but not all of it, right? And maybe I'm wrong here, but I was looking quickly. It seemed like Chapter 2 of the concepts that is actually that you can click on and open up that chapter wasn't exactly everything that you presented in the staff report. So just making sure that we are updating everything all at once and we have the cleanest, most updated version of the actual glossy, draft of the plan, I think is important. And I think you've done your work. You've heard from the community, you've heard from the developer, you've heard from city staff, you've heard from the council, you're hearing more from us. But I think now it comes to, are we going to start executing? And I know that for you as planning staff, that's not necessarily your job, that's the council, that's us. But I think giving us as much guidance and being as specific in the draft small area plan about how much tax revenue we already have from this area. We could do analyses about if the zoning changes are approved, how much more revenue might be coming in. And we should have real dollar amounts attached to the anti-displacement strategies. You have a big menu there. We can't do all of them. There's no way. We might not even be able to do one of them. But we need to get realistic because we've just put a menu of all these different things out there to maybe placate certain people. But at the end of the day, for the small businesses, it doesn't matter how many strategies we have if we're not going to go forward with any of them. So let's get real detailed. Let's get real specific about how much money we have to play with and what we could actually implement and execute. And we should have that in this small area plan. That's the part that's still missing. But a huge improvement. I hope a lot of people are happy. I'm not trying to be negative. I am ecstatic with what you have done. But I've seen a lot of good plans, great plans, that haven't come to fruition. And I get a little nervous with this plan because I don't know if our city is willing to really allocate the tax dollars to execute those strategies that you've done such a good job researching and you've also heard from the community about. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have any comments, or shall we continue on with our cause here?
For the things that are missing in concepts, if you could pass those along so we make sure that they're updated and they're consistent. We don't want any gaps there. But we can continue with comments and questions.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Camont, did you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah, I want to second Mr. Heyer's compliments for you all on staff and the community and their engagement with this whole process. I think it's really been amazing. I loved the description of the activities and the comment cards and the tabletop activities. I thought it was just a really creative way to engage the community. It seemed like there was a good turnout for all of the pop-ups, and you even went directly to the businesses, who might be too busy to come. So I just thank you for the time investment and all the thoughtful ideas you were able to gather from the community and reflect in the plan. Some of those included some interesting ideas. I think there was a lot of interest in improving the pedestrian experience in that area. I agree, it's definitely subpar compared with other parts of the city. One idea was adding a traffic light at the gate. I don't think that made it into the plan, but I saw that you also are proposing narrowing Wilson Boulevard, which might make it a traffic light. It might make it easier to make that turn, right, in and out. But I don't know how much that helps with kind of pedestrian access to kind of the main entrance, though it is sort of more of a entrance for autos and maybe for people. So yeah, I really like the idea of creating better pedestrian connections, like through and into the shopping center through the parking lot. I was wondering, I love the idea of narrowing Wilson Boulevard, putting it on a road diet, but I was wondering how you think that will work with the BRT, which may require a dedicated lane in the future. Did you all talk about that? I know you referenced BRT as something that could potentially happen someday. A lot of people have been spending a lot of time on it for many years, so hopefully it does. But if we are narrowing Wilson, I'm not sure what that means for BRT. Did you all talk about that?
So the road diet concept is based off of CACT comments, but also the Nelson Nygaard study recommended that road diet. So it's also assuming the BRT entering the area as a future project.
Okay, so presumably we would be down to one lane in either direction. That would be just a shared travel lane for BRT.
Right.
Yeah, we'd have to look. We keep putting in for technical assistance studies. I think VDOT is ready to do it if we can get a scope that we can get to agreement on with Arlington County DES as well as Fairfax County DOT. I think everyone wants to see a better design for that street. Right now it's a road. It ought to be a street.
Right.
Where people can safely walk across. They want to do it, and I think it's just a matter of finding a partner that can fund a technical assistance study and getting agreement from the jurisdictions going in about sort of what is our future vision for this thing. So I think this small area plan is putting that marker down of what the city thinks Saigon Boulevard ought to be, and I think we just got to keep having that conversation and drive it forward.
The rendering that you have of what it could be was really terrific in the plan. I love any raised cycle track is so much better than any bike lane in the street, as I think anybody here would agree. And I actually wondered if you were considering a road diet for Roosevelt as well. That street has 2 lanes, and both in each direction, and the central sort of median, tree line median. Would that also be a candidate, or is that a place where you're trying to preserve space for BRT?
So that cross-section, I think you've got this, the Fairfax County Seven Quarters Plan that talks about that being sort of a transit way. I think their vision is that eventually one of those lanes get used as the BRT lane. I think one of the biggest things is making sure we hold on to the bikeway that's in there and make sure that sort of Roosevelt and Saigon become sort of the spines of this sort of bike network that eventually connects that area.
Yeah, I think you had also contemplated a raised cycle track for Roosevelt, and I would 100% support that. I think anything that we can do to increase or enhance the connections from Eden Center to the Metro is really valuable to Eden Center and to the whole community. There are a lot of people that would use that. Let's see. Oh, I love the ideas about a greenway on the backside, the pedestrian sort of a way to connect pedestrians through to the different parcels. I'm assuming that would be something that would happen as redevelopment or takes place. I think there's room behind the Eden Center to make that work. But some of the other parcels, I don't know if that would be able to happen until there was redevelopment. Was that the way you were thinking about it?
Yeah, it would be subject to redevelopment. Everything would get connected as the area evolves.
Yeah, I think it would be great to have a pedestrian connection through there. Some of the issues that the community raised were parking, safety, lighting, cleanliness, and I'm just wondering, are those a city responsibility or a developer responsibility? It seems I would second Ms. Flynn's comments earlier that I think there's probably more the developer could be doing to maintain the property. And is there anything that the city can do with regard to lighting on the property, or is that really a developer, something that they have to manage?
Yeah, so we can encourage better lighting around the property. The plan encourages lighting on site for security measures and enhanced safety, but at the end of the day, it is
A private.
the managers.
Yes. I also would definitely support the idea of renaming Wilson Boulevard Saigon Boulevard, and I really love the idea of that whole area being branded Little Saigon, but I do understand why there might be some misgivings from the developer about this sort of brand confusion. I'm just curious how, the community feels about, which thing would be more recognizable. I mean, Eden Center is really famous up and down the East Coast, and so how does introducing sort of a second brand, I don't know. I just don't know how they coexist. So it's just a open question that I have. Is that something that you spoke to the community about? It seemed to me from the comments that there was a lot of support for that, for both ideas.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we were at the pop-ups, we did hear a lot of support for Little Saigon East, but also just this notion of expanding the area to be more of a Vietnamese community. So how could you do that? Would be, branding the area as Little Saigon East and encouraging placekeeping that just lends to that. But it's a very valid and interesting point that if you do rebrand, does it take away from the Eden Center and all of the great work that's been done there to establish what it is today? We had not really thought about an alternate name. When you Google Eden Center, it actually comes up as one of the Little Saigons in America. So it was,
So it may already be, that's the reality.
Right. So it's kind of calling it what it already functions as. But is there a better way to incorporate the current name into the district? It's a very interesting question, and I think something that we as staff should ponder. There's always opportunity for, if you get these flags or these banners on the light pole having the Eden Center, a photo of it, just showing people that it's here in this district, but could more be done around the name to enhance Eden?
Maybe there's some sort of combination of the two that, a pairing. I had a question about the cultural celebration overlay, which I think is a great idea. I'm just wondering, does that have any does it have any teeth with regards to preservation, or is it sort of just an honorary?
Yeah, it's just a sublayer that's honoring the culture in the area. So there is no teeth to it right now, but it's recognizing that we're doing placekeeping in the area around Vietnamese culture.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I was wondering about. I also support the idea of tax revenue. I think the figure in the report was 3.9 million in revenue that comes from the Eden Center to the city's coffers every year, and I fully support the idea of that tax revenue going to, being reinvested back, some portion of that tax revenue being reinvested back into the legacy business conservation programs, other programs that would enhance the experience of going to the Eden Center. But reading about all these amazing small business assistant programs and all these strategies that you've laid out, it just made me wonder if there are other businesses in the city that would benefit from programs like this. If we're going to be setting a program like this up for the Eden Center, is it possible that there are other businesses in the city that could take advantage of something like this?
So initially, our thought with the legacy conservation program was having this as like a pilot for the whole city, and then using the small area plan to really facilitate this idea. But if there's money coming from Eden Center, then the intention would be to reinvest that tax money right back into Eden Center. So other businesses wouldn't have the opportunity to be part of this program that we're proposing in the plan. But I think it's, an opportunity to start a discussion about something larger. But for the intention of like this plan, no.
Yeah, no, it would make sense that other businesses in other areas of the city wouldn't benefit from this particular program, but I just, I think there just seemed to be so much value in all of these small business supports, and I know that we have other small businesses in the city, so maybe it's just something to encourage our council. I do think it makes sense to pilot it here on a actually very large scale. I'm not sure how many 118 businesses, is that right? Or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's, in the plan, I think we have 125, but I think I was reading something the other day that it's 122, so I would have to double check.
Anyway, a lot of potential clients for programs like that, which, you'll learn a lot if this actually is set up, which I think is great, and other businesses eventually could maybe benefit from similar programs for other areas of the city. I do think it's important, from an equity perspective, to be able to offer these kinds of supports to all small businesses that may struggle from time to time. So I'm glad we're trialing it here, but I just hope that it's something we can expand to offer to other small businesses in the future. I wondered, did you consider also like a business improvement district? I work downtown, and I know that we have like the Golden Triangle Business Improvement District. Was that something that you all had considered?
So in the initial drafting phases, we had talked about something similar, but for this POA, no, we didn't land on a bid. We did talk about, commercial corridor programs like Main Streets, getting something like that established if, Little Saigon East is created, maybe having a program that's more like placekeeping, place-based management, that type of thing. But we did not move forward with the bid.
Yeah, I think we've looked at bids. Certainly, we looked at sort of the feasibility of one here. We've looked at one citywide. We've looked at one for West Broad, for different portions of Washington. I think the numbers that keep coming back to us are that the sort of total property valuation, the total assessed value, isn't sort of at that critical threshold for actually making a bid work, right? If you think about, say, the Crystal City bid or the Roslyn bid, the amount of land value and building value they're working with is so high that, a small, a couple pennies on the tax rate generates so much revenue that you can actually operate a bid. And I think the city, and certainly sort of a subsection of the city, isn't really at that level yet.
Okay. I really like the idea of leveraging our SE criteria to, really support some of these strategies and promote the cultural heritage at Eden Center. I love the idea of a Chamber of Commerce, and also the idea for a community center in that area. I think is an excellent one, especially if it's a place that some of these services could be provided to residents and businesses.
Yeah, the Cultural Center is a direct product of our pop up. So we met a lot of people who thought that would be great use in the East End. And we met people who had just come from Viet School, language school nearby, and having a space at Eden Center would be so valuable for the community to have Viet School or have meeting rooms for community organizations to meet. So yeah, I'm glad people like that addition to the plan. We do too.
Great. I think that's all my questions, but thank you again.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you. What about this side?
Yeah, I don't have too many comments. I mean, just overall, it's definitely come a long way. I mean, it's been a long process, but yeah, I'll just echo, and I think I said this 2 weeks ago, that yeah, staff certainly should be commended for the outreach that you've done. And so I think that's been great. So I don't need to belabor that point, but yeah, staff's done a great job, I think, and the plan really reflects that. And so that says a lot. Just like a couple practical matters. I mean, does the city actually control Wilson Boulevard? I mean, doesn't our city boundary end at the right of way? Doesn't VDOT control that section of Wilson Boulevard? So could we even rename it? Maybe we could unofficially give it a nickname or call it something different, but can we actually rename that street? I don't know if we control it.
We would need a partnership so that the jurisdictional line sort of moves across the right-of-way.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's in the midline, sometimes it's
I
on
was
our
looking
side.
at it on the
sometimes
map
it's
as
on
we were
theirs.
talking. It seems like it's mostly following the curb on the Eden Center side. In that area, you know, like 29, South Washington Street, it's running right down the middle, and we definitely control half of it. But on that area, it looks like I don't know if Wilson Boulevard is within the corporate limits of the city. So I don't know, just a minor technical point. That's the kind of things I look at. I don't think we actually have it in the city, so maybe we could get VDOT to rename it. But I also think there's issues true with the confusion of, I mean, having like maybe, you know, a lot of times streets get honorary names, and maybe that's like a more realistic way because people, you know, are coming along Wilson Boulevard. Unless Arlington was going to rename it, people are going to try to find it, and I think it's confusing if our one block or two blocks has a different name, even though people, you know, probably be able to figure it out with GPS and whatever. But I think maybe having like an honorary name, you know, it might be good. And same thing for like, you know, any kind of like I think in the plan you had pictures of Vietnamese language street signs, you know, underneath English language street signs. Things like that are great. That's a neat thing to do to help add that character to the area. But I think all that can be done kind of in a honorary or unofficial kind of capacity without formally renaming the street and making businesses change their address and things like that, like what just went on with Langston Boulevard, and that's a entirely different issue. But you know, there's like a monetary cost to like renaming a street and making people change their address. So whereas the honorary title might accomplish the same goal of recognizing the community without adding a cost for people to, you know, change their address. But so just that point. But and also I think, you know, I think that just to point to some of the, I know this isn't a public hearing, but you know, I appreciate that the owner's representative is here, and I appreciate the sentiment. And what was said was consistent with what I've heard, is that the owner is committed to the site, keeping it essentially, you know, as a Vietnamese, you know, or Asian-focused retail center for the foreseeable future. But I think, you know, the point of the planning process is that it's a long time horizon, and so anyone in the real estate business knows that things can and do change over time. Fairfax County, you know, who controls the majority of the rest of the, you know, the Seven Corners areas, you know, has a plan in place now. And I think it is only a matter of time before redevelopment does come. And so I think this process is not necessarily about, you know, now or next year or even the next 5 years. It's looking out broader than that to kind of lay out the groundwork so that even when future planning commissions and future city councils, you know, inherit what we've produced, they understand what the will of the community is, and that's their starting point. And so that's why it is important to, you know, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here on the planning commission because that's what we do, but it's by its nature, it's a long horizon, and so there still is a lot of benefit to laying out what we want to see in an area of the city that, you know, hasn't seen levels of redevelopment like the rest of the city has historically, but that I think is poised to change for multiple reasons. So I think that's you know, goes without saying, but maybe it doesn't go without saying. I think we need to make it clear why we're doing this. And there's also, of course, the other areas of the small area plan that are not the Eden Center. The Eden Center is the largest single property, but there's a significant amount that's not the Eden Center, and we're trying to lay out the vision for that as well and make sure that it works. You know, it's a part of the city that historically has been somewhat disconnected, disjointed, hard to move around. And so there's a lot of goals we can try to jumpstart through this process without, necessarily having a rezoning of the Eden Center. So just to make that clear. But otherwise, like I said, I like a lot of the ideas that are in here. I mean, it's a very comprehensive document now, and I think it's starting to coalesce. I mean, initially, I'll be very honest, when we started, just like the area itself is somewhat disjointed. I wasn't sure, if we were going to be able to stitch together a cohesive vision, but, I'm starting to see that, using the Eden Center as a hub and trying to build off of that unique asset that we have. I think I sent around to everyone the link from the Channel 4 story that got picked up, in the news the other day, talking about that. And it just hits home about, or just underscores the importance of this part of the city. And, as a small jurisdiction, I think it needs to be more widely publicized that it is in the city of Falls Church. And the more we can accentuate its uniqueness, and that it's part of the city, it just adds to, the richness of our community. So, and I think the plan is starting to do that now, and some of the concepts that you've outlined here, and even in the introductory section as you've edited it. So, so overall, we're definitely moving in the right direction, after a kind of a difficult road to get to this point. And I'm starting to see something that, I think we're going to be happy with when we're finished. But, so yeah, those are my overall comments. I mean, I don't have any sort of major changes I would recommend at this point. I think you've already kind of made the adjustments, the more major adjustments with this version. And I think we're on the right path. It's just a matter of fine tuning some of the smaller details. And the anti-displacement stuff, my colleagues have commented on it. I mean, I think it's a worthy thing for us to look at. I think we do have to balance, obviously, what's sort of allowed under Virginia law, what's, the issue of private property, and, how much we certainly can advocate for that, but I think we have to just look at what's realistic as far as what we can do, as far as a comp plan, and ultimately a zoning ordinance, as far as that goes. But I think, to the extent there are things we can do, and we can certainly, with strong language, make it clear what the will of the city is in that regard. But, I understand, the comments that were made by the owner. So anyhow, that's all I have for now. But again, good work, staff, and I'm encouraged by, where this is going and the progress that you've made.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Friedlander.
Thank you. Again, it's very difficult to go after everybody, but I do want to echo a lot of my colleagues' points about the amount of intense work that has been put into this since I've seen it last. It has developed significantly, and it does reflect a lot of the comments that I read. I read through a lot of the comments from the pop-ups and the staff reports, and it's really reflective of that. I have noticed that there are some things that could probably be fine-tuned in the actual plan itself to kind of bring what you put in the staff report, make it a little bit more strong and direct in there so that it doesn't get lost or glazed over. But just for initial questions, the Wilson Boulevard narrowing, I'm in full support of kind of activating that. I think it will help in connecting some of those, some of the neighboring jurisdictions. I do want to make sure that we are working with our access points from those ring roads and the development that's coming through from Fairfax County, just to make sure that we're aligning, our grand statements, our gateways into this community. Because right now the gateway is kind of offset from where that ring road looks like it might be coming into Roosevelt. But I think there's also great opportunities there. The other thing that I noticed, and maybe I just found it confusing, was that the traffic studies, or maybe the average vehicle trips per day, those were based on 2019 numbers and 2020 numbers. And the 2020 numbers, I mean, even if you just set those aside and you say, okay, that's not realistic, we need something more current. I don't even think last year would have been a more up-to-speed current count. But if you took the 2019 numbers, it looks like, and just purely looking at that next to no development in 2045, and then future development in 2045, there seems to be a 30% increase of vehicle traffic, and then a 400% increase of non-vehicle trips, which is great. And I'd love to see more of that activity. But the fact that the 30% additional vehicle trips, I feel like there's a little bit of smoke in those numbers, because then narrowing that boulevard, it bumps it out of that average daily trip rate to be able to narrow that boulevard down by 2045 or whatever. So if there's flexibility in the plan to bring back widening, if it's necessary to accommodate a traffic study. So it'd be important to get some good current traffic studies and then projected traffic studies. What happens if it's narrowed? What happens if it stays 3 lanes? What happens if it's 3.5? Or, I'm not quite sure. I'm not an expert at traffic, but those numbers seemed a little smoky to me. But I am all for making it more of a pedestrian and alternative transportation modal center. I think that's going to help. Also with helping down Roosevelt Avenue to kind of link us back to the city. I do agree that currently it's very disjointed. I mean, I live over on Hillwood, and we don't even think to walk over there because it's too hard to get over there safely, especially with kids. So it's always a car trip, and it's always embarrassing, like, oh, I'm going to drive my car over there. But I was looking at the proposed zoning and the proposed land use map, and then also the proposed street network that is in Chapter 6. And I think that's going to help kind of tie across from West Broad all the way through to Eden Center and then all the way across towards BJ's. And I think there's some really great opportunity to bring more park all the way through that as part of that cultural plaza, right? That's right now is kind of informally happening in the concrete parking lot, right? Like, and it's organically taking shape, and I feel like that's the better spot for the bulk of that plaza, just because it's in the elbow, it's in the protected area of all of the shops. But on the proposed land use map, we show that park space on Roosevelt. And so I feel like this is still in development, it's a great improvement from where it was. But I feel like there's a great opportunity to kind of link that, pull that in, but also with that pedestrian walkway, that maybe it happens along the easements of the property lines back there, not through the cemetery, but around that cemetery, right? Because it's private property, and to just be respectful of that. But I wonder if that's the intention, to kind of bring Tuckahoe through that and create an easement between the Oakwood, or what's now Falls Glen, and the Oakwood Cemetery. Is that kind of the thought process? And then pull that in to be more of a pedestrian arcade through that building into that what could be a really great space in what's right now a parking lot in Eden Center.
Yeah, and it would be a great way to activate that space for sure, and get more foot traffic, get more visibility. We were talking at the pop-ups about sticky spaces, like spaces where people want to stick around, and that would create that. So
I like that term, sticky space. I did have questions too, just about, the Taylor Fort Park? That, I'm not quite, I like the idea of making it permeable, but with the private property right there, I don't know how you can make that permeable and pull that in. I didn't quite understand that part of the concept plan.
Connecting it to Oakwood Cemetery. Yeah, I think the thought is just that if you're coming from Oakwood, you would have that easy access into Fort Taylor. Like a lot of people use Oakwood Cemetery for a run or recreational space to walk. So creating some sort of boundary where like Fort Taylor is more visible, because it's not right now. It's overgrown, and I don't think a lot of people know that it's there, or maybe they do, but they don't want to use it. So just making that space more recognizable and permeable in the way that you could flow more easily because you could see it. So
I think part of the challenge of that is the topography from West Broad. It is so tall. It's like over, I don't even know how tall it is to get up into that very tippy top corner. So you have to walk all the way up Roosevelt to come up to that point. So maybe there's an avenue to kind of make that more of a terracing. I don't know.
The reason it has historical significance is because of its topography. Roanoke has Star Hill Park, and I'm not suggesting that this would eventually rival Star Hill Park, although I don't know. But finding some way to take advantage of that, I was just looking at Google Maps. Google Maps doesn't even identify it as actually a green area. I would guess the Google truck thinks it's some odd extension of the auto dealership. So I think, in general, what we heard from the public is just we want green spaces. We've actually got some green spaces. Let's start by using the stuff we got. And so I think that some of it is get in there, clean it up, make sure people feel comfortable going in there, let them know that it is a public park they can go into. And I think you're right that we're going to have to figure out how to get people in there. Given the grade, I remember when the bus shelter went in and we needed the retaining wall just to get the bus shelter in. So it's certainly a challenge.
Yeah, for sure. Right, because it's also very skinny. So yeah, I was curious too, like how that connects with that what you're calling a green street. Does that mean, which also looks like it's an easement behind Oakwood, on the side of Oakwood Cemetery, to kind of bring you into that other green street that looks like it's an easement between the Coons, kind of along that line, and I think it goes right up to the base of the water tower. Okay. So is the green street, just to help me understand that, is that more to be like tree lined, single lane each way with parking maybe on one side and more pedestrian friendly?
yes, that's correct.
Yeah, I think just looking at the area, it's sort of the satellite view shows that it's sort of odd to have such a large urban area that really only has 2 or 3 streets running through the whole thing. And so I think one of the challenges is sort of how can you build in connectivity, right? Right, what happened at the city's west end was the high school got torn down, the entire 10 acres got 9.5 acres got cleared, and then a new street grid went in to accommodate the new development, and that's not the vision here, right? So the vision here is we're going to hold on to sort of the parcelization and the uses in the area, and so given that you're holding on to everything, how do you still find a way to provide folks more access and more connectivity so that everyone doesn't get funneled onto 1 or 2 sort of roads that then have to carry the load.
Exactly. No, I think it's a great start, for sure, especially to kind of clean up the junction of West Broad and Hillwood right there. It is Hillwood. Yeah, it's Hillwood right there. To just kind of make that more of a grid, so that I think that will alleviate some things. I would like to make a comment to make sure that traffic study does include West Broad and Hillwood traffic, since those are both major thoroughfares during rush hour, and it does get quite backed up. So it would be important to have those average trips per day, also how those get funneled through that intersection. And I know that's all going to be part of that ring road and everything else that's happening right in that intersection at Seven Corners. But yeah, no, I really appreciate the effort that's been put into that whole side of it, just to kind of break up those long blocks. So that's it for questions for me.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
Might have comments later, but questions, I'm done.
Okay, guess I'm last here. I have just a couple of comments and questions, so this shouldn't take very long. First of all, when will this go through legal review? Has that been scheduled as of yet?
So it would go through review from the city attorney before a work session with council on the 22nd. That would be
Okay,
its first go
'cause
around with that.
could affect some of what we're looking at here. I get why, short term at least, there's a need for more parking. I think that's vital to the businesses there that are in the Eden Center. They're pulling traffic in from great distances in many cases. But as I read that, I mean, it kind of really goes against the direction we're headed every place else. And it may be that it just needs a little better explanation. I guess what troubles me is the whole issue of induced demand. I mean, if we put more parking spaces, people are going to drive there in cars. And that's not a direction that we seem to be going in other places. And it could be that in this small area plan, it's just going to take a lot longer before we get to the point where less parking can actually complement the needs of the businesses. So for right now, it just strikes me that it could benefit from just a little better explanation as to why we're doing something here that's quite different from the rest of the city. I would agree with the comments that we need to be a little bit more crisp on responsibility, and I think in some of the other plans, including I believe even the comprehensive plan itself, in some of the detailed chapters there are kind of responsible party who's assigned to do it. So that may be something you want to think about to see if that's possible. Otherwise, some of these things kind of hang out there, and it's like, okay, that's nice, but there's no kind of necessarily a responsibility. Kind of an example is the permanent and semi-permanent plaza. That's cool. The picture of it looked great, but it's kind of like, okay, who's going to do this? So that may need some additional explanation. Likewise, in Chapter 2, there was a sentence I pulled out here, providing the Eden Center with resources for improved commercial capacity and event planning. So again, that would be nice to know who would take the lead on coming up with what is a very good idea. And I'm right, aren't I, that any financial commitment would have to be approved by City Council? So that may be something we want to just highlight in the plan, just not to create any expectations that aren't realized. Chapter 6, we talk about a publicly funded parking garage. It strikes me as a heavy lift. Maybe it's something we can do. I wouldn't be opposed to the plan if it included it, but just my initial reaction is that's a tough one. Just wondering whether planning staff will work with within the ranks of other city staff to incorporate suggestions that tie into the CIP and the operating budget. Because ultimately, until the financial side of these kind of aspirational ideas get connected, it's not going to have, I mean, it'll still be a plan, it'll still be a vision as to where we want to go, but it's not going to seem very real or as real as it could be. There was a sentence that talked about rezoning applications will be considered on a case-by-case basis, and I'm just wondering, isn't that what we do for every place else? Is there something unique about that statement that I was missing?
No, we have found that statement sort of popped up in a, I don't think it was the most recent small area plan. I think the conversation got a little tilted at some point, and some folks were worried that showing a conceptual sort of redevelopment or a conceptual zoning map was a mandate to approve such an application. And so we clarified, no, that the small area plans don't create that mandate. And just to make that clear, we included that line, and now we generally include it in small area plans going forward.
So it's kind of a generic statement that would apply every place.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I figured that was probably just my
Yeah,
education
it doesn't
that was
change
needed there.
anything about the authority of the plan. It just clarifies what is the authority of the plan, right? The plan is not a zoning authority. It's not a change to a comprehensive plan. It's a guide that's trying to link together all these things, and it's something that should be consulted and considered and obviously weighed when applications or budgeting decisions are being made.
Okay. Just one more, and I'm not trying to hold myself as the Planning Commission grammarian, but I think this would read better when all the typos are fixed, so I would encourage you to do that on the next round. And that's all I have. So again, thank you very much for the great effort that staff put into it. It was very heartening to see how much energy and kind of positive effort you put into it, and I think a lot of people appreciated it. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Unless there are any other comments on this item, let me ask my fellow commissioners, do we want to take a quick couple of minutes break? Would that be sensible? Let's do that before we tackle T-zones. Okay, do we want to try to pull this back into session? All right, we have another work session item with the T-zone code updates. And as we are in advance of City Council issuing another first reading, which I don't think will occur for another 2 weeks, I think the idea tonight was to get an update from Paul, kind of where things went with the work session with City Council. But I mean, we can still provide some discussion on points that are particularly keen of interest to us right now. But my thought is that we don't need to get into the detailed kind of review of all the points that staff made in response to City Council and other things that we might want to do on a detailed basis tonight. So hopefully you all agree with that. And with that, Mr. Stoddard, I guess I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. To introduce the discussion before I turn it over to Mr. Jack Trainer, who's been our lead planner on this one, just timing-wise and sort of the purpose of tonight's work session. So the last time the Planning Commission saw this was when they made their formal recommendations back to council in February of this year, so about 3 months ago. And since that time, staff has been taking into account sort of the Planning Commission's recommendation, what council had referred out, additional comments from the community, and then working to convert all of that into legislative language, the proposed zoning updates themselves. We've been carrying along this table that begins on line 26 of the report, and I'm going to leave the walkthrough of the table to Jack. He knows it. He's very familiar with it. He wrote it. But this table is what we've been carrying around. It's the synopsis of the proposed elements in the zoning text. Of course, the zoning text itself is in the council report that's attached. So I thought we would use the time tonight just to walk through this this table we've been using for some time, just to update the commission on what staff's recommendations to council were. That's what we presented to council a couple weeks ago. And then also included in this cover memo, this cover report, is the items that council flagged or asked staff to look further into before bringing it back to them for consideration for first reading. And so I think the work session tonight has two purposes. One, to keep the commission informed of where the proposal is, what staff has recommended to council, and then also to give a space for planning commissioners to raise any questions or ask for further comments ahead of going into a consideration for a new first reading on May 22nd. But with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Trainer to walk through the two tables, the staff recommendations as well as the council questions and comments.
Sure, thanks, Mr. Stoddard. So yeah, this table starts on line 26, the staff report, as was noted. We've kind of broken this up into the different components that make up the T-zone recommendation. So I'll just start on line 26 here, which is residential and commercial uses. The Planning Commission recommendation was to include a legacy clause for existing single-family homes, but otherwise exclude single-family and two-family homes from being new allowable uses going forward, as well as allowing triplexes and quadplexes to be built by right in T-zones. Staff's recommendation is the same as the Planning Commission's recommendation. For townhouses, the Planning Commission's recommendation was the same as City Council's referral, which is that townhouses, condos, and apartment buildings would all be allowed via the special use permit process on sites of no larger than 1 acre. Staff's recommendation is the same as the Planning Commission and the City Council's. There's also the note here that staff is continuing to explore the legal and economic feasibility of caps on some of the unit sizes in T-zones in order to achieve some more affordability. For mixed use bucket, the Planning Commission's recommendation was also the same as City Council's referral, which was to remove the MUR restrictions. and staff's recommendation follows suit. For commercial uses, the Planning Commission's recommendation was to re-examine the proposed allowable by right commercial uses, as well as removing boarding houses, lodging, and rooming houses, and removing parking lots as principal by right uses. Staff's recommendation is similar, but with a key change in that in adding clinics for human care, restaurants, retail businesses. There's also the recommendation to add retail business and retail service uses generally. And a little further down, we'll get into some distinctions in the districts, kind of part of the discussion. Staff's recommendation was also including the removal of boarding houses, lodging, rooming houses, parking lots as a principal use, as the Planning Commission recommended. Okay, moving on to building heights. The Planning Commission recommended that 3 and 4 family homes be built by right to 2.5 stories or 35 feet, whichever is shorter, and that by right commercial uses be able to be built to 3 stories or 40 feet, and residential or commercial projects built through the SUP process be able to achieve 4 stories or 50 feet, whichever is shorter. And staff's recommendation is the same as Planning Commission's. For step backs related to building height, the Planning Commission recommended that 10-foot step backs be implemented on buildings when facing residential districts, and also that those 10-foot step backs be included on all street frontages for buildings taller than 40 feet as well. And staff's recommendation is the same as Planning Commission's. For setbacks, the Planning Commission recommended 20-foot setbacks for the front and rear yard with SUP allowances of a front yard of 15 feet and a rear yard of 10 feet and side yards of 10 feet as well. Staff's recommendation is the same as Planning Commission, with the kind of added clarification that the front setback would be measured from the face of the curb instead of the property line. Otherwise, it's the same as the Planning Commission's in terms of setbacks. For lot coverage, staff's recommendation is also the same as the Planning Commission, which included an 80% impervious surface maximum, a by right building coverage maximum of 60%, with the potential to go up to 70% through the SUP, and a tree canopy coverage minimum of 15%. For historic preservation, staff's recommendation is also the same as the Planning Commission, which is to maintain the HCC, as well as some added consideration for council when in the criteria for SUP applications. Specifically to incorporate and maintain historic structures when included in an application. So for parking, the Planning Commission recommended setting all off-street parking minimums at 1 spaces per home, with no off-street parking allowed within the front setback, and to include electric vehicle or EV charging. Language, staff's recommendation is to kind of refer back to what the zoning code allows for today, with some notable exceptions, mainly for under the townhouse restrictions going from 2.5 per home, as the zoning code calls for today, to 2, and including 3 and 4 family in the 1 and 2 family bucket, and allowing 1 space per home there as well. Otherwise, multifamily would follow the zoning code off-street parking regulations as they are listed today, and so would commercial, which would vary by use and size. A couple notes here, still in parking, that I want to highlight is that Planning Commission may reduce off-street parking requirements during the site plan review process with submission of a TDM plan per section 48-969 of the city code, and that no off-street parking would be allowed in the front setback, which is consistent with what the Planning Commission recommended. Electric vehicle charging language has been included in the SUP consideration criteria. for council's consideration, and also that, not listed here, but I think it's listed a little further down, that tandem parking is also part of the staff's recommendation for townhouses. So for solar components, Planning Commission recommended that some solar infrastructure or solar-ready construction, some kind of solar component be included in the T-zone language. Staff's recommendation is that some of the solar language has, like the EV language, been included in the SUP consideration. Specifically under the environmental stewardship bucket, if you will. So for districts, the Planning Commission recommended combining the T1 and T2 districts that exist today into a single T-zone, as well as removing residential uses on T-zone districts along North Washington Street, north of Great Falls Street. Staff's recommendation is the same, with the addition that any subdivisions any subdivisions be included in an SUP application on North Washington Street, north of Great Falls Street. I missed one here. In that, the Planning Commission's part of the Planning Commission's recommendation, recall, for districts was also that all commercial uses fronting Park Avenue would be conditional to the SUP approval process. Staff's recommendation also varies a little bit. For Park Avenue, that all commercial uses be allowed, all allowable commercial uses be allowed by right of up to 4,000 square feet on Park Avenue only, and that anything exceeding 4,000 square feet would be subject to the SUP approval process. And again, that's for Park Avenue. That restriction would only be for Park Avenue. For affordable housing, the Planning Commission recommended a T-zone tax increment financing district that would collect all incremental new tax revenue and be redistributed into an affordable housing citywide financing structure. Staff's recommendation is kind of actually mirrors what City Council initially referred out, which is that for residential projects with an SUP approval, so any residential projects that aren't 3 or 4 family homes would require 10% of all new units or fraction thereof to be affordable as low income or workforce housing. This would also provide for a cash in lieu option. Okay, and here for the last part of the table is the project reviews. For 3 and 4 families, this would follow the kind of standard grading plan review that 1 and 2 family home projects go through today. For townhouse and multifamily projects, this would follow the SUP process, then the site plan procedure, which is consistent with the Planning Commission's recommendation. And for commercial uses, this would require a site plan, whether it's through the SUP or by right. And then the SUP process would follow for Park Avenue projects that exceed 4,000 square feet. And then mixed use would follow the SUP and site plan process similarly. Okay, and so this is the kind of comment response table that came out of the last City Council work session that happened last Monday. Under uses, Council requests that staff continue to look into some consideration for unit size caps. Under urban design, there's the quest to further consider the merits of a single T-zone or perhaps many T-zones, as well as exploring some buffer protection options for multifamily buildings that aren't zoned residential but function as multifamily buildings, as well as exploring the feasibility of reducing maximum height allowances that are being proposed. Under historic preservation, there's the request to provide for stricter protections for historic properties, possibly including restrictive covenants. Under affordable housing, there's the request to seek a second opinion on the proposed TIF TIF district from the city attorney, which I believe is underway, and then the market test, which is staff is continuing to speak to members of the development community, builders, about what's on the table right now, what's being considered, to make sure that these are actual kind of feasible and doable conditions. And so I'll close here by looking at the schedule here. Tonight, May 3rd, we're here at the Planning Commission for a work/informational session. City Council is scheduled to have their new first reading at their May 22nd meeting. From there, the Planning Commission, of course, will get it back as scheduled right now. The T-zone consideration would come back to the Planning Commission for a work session on June 7th. Followed by a public hearing on June 21st. And, if this stays on track, then City Council would have another work session on the Planning Commission's updated recommendation at its July 10th meeting, with final consideration happening July 24th. So, in the attachments, we've included the staff report that was used for that City Council work session on April 24th. That includes the kind of mocked up code. I believe that kind of ends my presentation. And Mr. Chair, I'll hand it back to you for any comments, questions, things we want to dive into tonight.
Okay, well, it sounds to me like the council is continuing to fine-tune their understanding of the proposal. I think that's good. They're making additional changes on things that we proposed. I think that's also a very positive step, and hopefully we can continue to perform in that regard as well when this comes back to us. Let me open it up to our colleagues here and just see if there's any questions or any kind of issues that you think need to be surfaced at this point. Ms. Friedlander, since you've usually on the last end of the deal, I'm happy to let you speak first if you like. You want to pass? Okay, all right. Someone else like to contribute a comment or question?
I'm happy to go first. I'll make it quick, as quick as I can. I would say that, my main concern with this policy has been the affordable housing component. I guess I would use the word disappointed to see that much of the triggering of us turning this proposal down and sending it back to council was because there was not enough affordable housing. I thought we made that very clear. I think we had a unanimous vote on having stronger language with the tax increment financing component. And to see this go to the city council for discussion, to go through the staff, and then for it to come back to us with the same exact proposal that sent this back to council is ridiculous. I'm being very honest, you have wasted all of our time. And at our last meeting, there was question about whether we could actually do the TIF. I sent it to everybody on the Planning Commission. I sent it to all city staff. I sent it to City Council. Paul looked at it. He's our Director of Planning. He said we could do it. I know we can do it. And now all of a sudden there's a question that, TIF may not be feasible because of the state statute. That is incorrect. Either there's political will or there's not. We can do this. If there's not political will, there's not political will. But I think there is political will. You saw the political will at our last discussion on this, where we sent it back to the council. So I don't know if I need to talk to the council. I don't know if I need to talk to staff. I'm looking for advice from the staff, and I'm looking at you guys right now and other staff members who are here. How could this come back to us with the same recommendation that got this rejected in the first place? That means it should be rejected again. I mean, do you guys like doing all this work for nothing? I don't think so. And I know I said I would keep it brief, but I didn't. But I will say this. It was clear to me. If this is how it stands, I am going to reject it. I am also going to work as hard as I can to get the political movement to get this rejected and squashed, unless the affordable housing component changes. Now, I will give you a recommendation right now. Let's have 50% of the units affordable in the T-zones. It's at 10% cash and lieu. Take it out, make it 50. That may kill it too. I don't want to kill this, but to come back with 10% of units affordable on a SUP and then cash in lieu, that's watered down and weak, and there's no reason we should do any of these changes. It will not get us a slight bit of affordable housing that we need in the city. We should do development to do equitable development, grow the tax base, redistribute it, get more affordable housing. This is growth for growth's sake. Do we want to be known as the city that just wants to keep on growing and wants to fund movie theaters and redevelop and displace the Eden Center? Because that's the track we are on. I was brought here, I was asked to serve on the Planning Commission because I'm an expert in affordable housing, to bring my expertise to bear so that we could move the needle on affordable housing. Since I've been on the Planning Commission, I've been giving proposals to you guys, to the council, to everybody, and it is consistently being not listened to and rejected. So that tells me you don't want it. So why should I be wasting my time? So if this does not change, and I'm speaking to the staff because the staff is the ones that recommended us to look at a proposal that had the same old numbers that we rejected, move those numbers when it goes to council. Get this to have more affordable housing. And stop the political games of whether a TIF is feasible or not. It is feasible. Do you not want to do it? Then, that's another conversation. But to say that it might not be feasible legally is misinformed, and whoever is giving that information should be fired. So I've spoken my piece. Thank you for listening. I hope we reform this policy so that we get economic development that feeds some affordable housing and that we become a more diverse, more equal, and just city. But as long as I've been on the Planning Commission, we have not moved in that direction one bit.
Okay, thank you for that. Paul, first of all, I'll give you an opportunity if there's anything you would like to say.
Sure. Right, the Planning Commission is always free to make its recommendations to the council, and I think that's what I had advised you all to do, that you had examples where TIFs had been used to support affordable housing. You had an example project of a specific project in Alexandria that had made use of a TIF, and so I had advised you all, I think, to make your recommendation back. And so we did run that through legal review. We were under one attorney then, and the attorney had advised the council that it was not allowable. It wasn't allowable sort of use of the TIF laws in Virginia. Council accepted that advice, and then when staff brought the revised code language to council most recently, we're now under a new city attorney, and so I think prudently they asked for a second opinion from the new attorney, and they are looking into making that revised or looking at that issue a second time, and I expect them to provide legal advice to council again.
So you think by the time council takes this up again that the new city attorney will have looked at this issue and kind of given us, her take on what the state law allows?
Yeah, obviously council knows that the affordable housing component of this proposal is sort of important to it, right? It's one of the motivations for looking at it in the first place. And so I think council wants this to have a strong housing component. I think they're always free, whether there's, right, and the zoning ordinance isn't a taxing ordinance, right? They're separate things. And so the council is always free to assign tax revenues to further support affordable housing. They've been making strides in that area, and of course, I think the expectation is they'll continue doing that. In terms of the proposal that's on the table, one of the things staff highlighted when we did present it to council is that part of the benefit of getting the units in the project is that it ensures that some of the value being generated that value is then shared and turned directly into units versus waiting purely for the increment to show up at a later date. And I'm not saying it has to be an either or; it could be a both and. And then the cash in lieu option was actually a recommendation coming out of the Housing Commission. They were worried that the small size of the projects could make it difficult to accommodate to incorporate the units on site. And so that was actually one of their comments when they had looked at it previously.
Okay, well, it strikes me that the key step here is to get the city attorney's interpretation on what's allowed, and then I think each of us will have to kind of make our own conclusion as to what we want to do, just as council did after getting the very clear feedback. I must say I was at the city council meeting where the interim city attorney opined on this issue. There was no gray area around his opinion. So it strikes me that that's the necessary first step, and then each of us are going to have to take a hard look at this and see where we want to come out. I was comfortable in including it in our recommendation to council, mainly because benefited Mr. Hyra's expertise. There seemed to be a little bit of uncertainty as to just how we were proposing to apply a TIF. And I thought it was important that it go forward in the way that he proposed it to get that clarification. So, any other comments from other commissioners on either that or any other aspect of this that you'd like to take advantage of the work session to ask?
I mean, well, just also so I'm clear, I thought also, just so I know kind of where we are in the process, I mean, I thought when we made our recommendation to council that we were sending it back to council directly, for them to chew on in a work session. I'm confused about sort of the staff recommendation as almost like a filter of what we recommended. I mean, in my view, there shouldn't be a final column in that chart. There should be, the next step in the process after we rejected it, it goes back to council and they decide what they want to do. I'm confused why there would even be another column in that chart that would be any different than what we recommended. I suppose. I mean, again, I guess staff is free to make their own recommendations. Staff sort of like plays its own role in the process. But so I'm kind of confused. And so now, council's had a work session on what? On the Planning Commission's recommendations? On staff's recommendations?
Yeah, we probably skipped over this too quickly in the staff report, so let me jump to this quickly. If you can go to the cover report, Jack, and go down to line 58. So Planning Commission public hearing was on February 15th, 2023. It's line 58. And then what you're suggesting is absolutely the next step that was taken. So March 6th, without filter, staff carried the recommendation of the Planning Commission back to council. That was the City Council work session on March 6th. The direction from council to staff coming out of that work session was to host a community question and answer, which we did actually in this room on March 21st. Staff reported the results of that, as well as responses to council's questions at March 6th, as well as the revised sort of text proposal on April 24th. So that April 24th text, which is also attached to your packet tonight, was based on sort of council direction from that March 6th work session. So without filter, they did see the Planning Commission's recommendation, and that's why we wanted to have this work session tonight, to let you know sort of what's happened since you all last saw it in February.
Okay, all right. And I do recall, and again, I apologize because, there have been a lot of meetings on this topic, and I do recall hearing in March and April and reading some of that and actually, I think I watched part of it. So, okay. And so now, right, the next step was they had an additional work session. We're getting another look at sort of like we're not, until they do first reading, we're still sort of in like a, kind of in a limbo period where we're in between, if they, and of course, they still have to approve the first reading. Council could, in theory, not approve it. The whole thing could just die if they don't get enough votes to send it out again for first reading. I don't think that'll happen, but who knows? So we're still kind of in a limbo period where we're kind of providing comments. So anything we do tonight, are we transmitting anything? We're not really directly communicating with council.
No, there's no action. I think, right, I think my sense is that it's just been too long since we touched base with the Planning Commission, and so that was the purpose, to sort of bring this up, let you guys know where it is.
I see. Okay, I know, I appreciate that, and I kind of get that. This is kind of a more of an informal discussion with staff about kind of what's happened since we last saw it, which is fine. I have no problem with that. Just to echo what Mr. Hyra said, my opinions in general haven't changed since we heard it then. As far as that goes, I don't think I have any different opinion, based on that. I'll have to defer to Mr. Hyra on the affordable housing. It would seem to me, and I'm not a TIF expert, but it would seem to me that it's doable. I'll have to let the lawyers and the experts, opine on that issue. I think the bugaboo is like using the TIF revenue not within the TIF area or something. I know that's like certainly within, I think there's no question of you're using it within the same district. It's 100%. That's been done. I've seen that done in Arlington and in Alexandria. So I think the issue is taking it from one part of town to another. But it would seem to be there's ways to do it legally. But I'm hoping the new city attorney, I'm hoping that I'm glad they're taking another look at it. I'm glad council asked for that. I think there is support on council for it, so I'm glad they're kind of pushing back against that initial opinion. But I guess we'll wait and see how that turns out. I'm glad to see, in the spirit of no one listening to what you say, I'm glad to see that someone asked further consider the merits of a single T-zone or many T-zones. I think I said that the very first meeting we had on it. I've continued to say it every single meeting. I will continue to say it. If I hear one more time about the ZOAC report from 2011, I'll puke just because they said it, and I don't want to hear about that anymore. I don't care what they said. What I'm saying is that the areas are so different, I'll say it again, they're so different that I think there's merit in having a T1 and a T2 as long as they're mapped properly. Maybe the problem was they weren't mapped geographically in an area that synced up with what made sense. But anyhow, so I'm glad they've said that. So if we're commenting on council's work session comments, I agree. I think they should further consider the merits again, because I think Park Avenue screams out for a different treatment than the other T-zones. It's a small area, but I think all of the T-zones are small. I think it just screams out for that. I think a broad-brushed approach, I think is going to be difficult and just is begging for unintended consequences and results we didn't anticipate by trying to do a broad brush T-zone ordinance that captures everything when you're trying to compare, large lots on Washington Street with, small lots on Park. I just think that the conditions are so dramatically different. I've said it every time. I'll continue to say it. I'd like to see 2 zones. I know you've tried to differentiate it as far as where things front, but I don't know if that quite goes far enough. So I would still continue to advocate for that. So yeah, that's kind of, I guess that's all I have to say at this point. Otherwise, yeah, I think the way we voted, or the way I voted back in February, generally still agree with what we did. I think everything we said, I still agree with. So, we'll see what council sends back to us. It's kind of the way I felt back then. We'll see what we get back. I know there's a member of council here, so they're listening, and I hope that they, we'll see what they send us back. I hope it incorporates most, if not all, of what we recommended. That's
Okay.
it.
Commissioner Kamar, did you have any?
I'm also optimistic that the new city lawyer might have a more positive view of Mr. Hyra's proposal. So we'll see how that goes. I want to know what happened with parking.
Sure. So there was a, there it is on the screen. So I think where the Planning Commission had set it was at one space per home. One of the feedbacks we got actually from the public Q&A as well, the community Q&A, as well as the written comments that came in advance of the council meeting was that townhomes across the city should be treated the same. And so I think where townhome parking is today is 2.5. And I think since we were, right, we had gotten into this conversation as sort of a T-zone specific conversation. We were a little leery of going in and sort of changing the rest of the townhouse districts. And so what we did is we tried to sort of pick a point in the middle where we were getting to sort of 2 spaces per home, which is less than the current 2.5, but not sort of separating it in terms of sort of, well, townhouses in the T districts need this versus townhouses in other districts need that. In talking to the development community, at least in terms of current house sort of townhouse construction, it does seem like 2 spaces anyway is what folks are looking for. So the modification we did include was to clarify that those 2 spaces could be tandem parked. Currently, the zoning ordinance in the city doesn't allow tandem parking. So we clarified that the 2 spaces could be tandem parked. I think we may end up having to revisit that anyway. I did get a reminder from the city attorney that like things need to be treated in a similar fashion, and that's actually within district, not across district. So here, if the parking regulation is based on sort of the number of homes, then that needs to be consistent within district. It's less important about whether townhouses in different districts are being treated the same way. So that may be sort of that number may need further adjustment. So it may end up that we have to provide for that consistency within district. We may end up sort of back where the Planning Commission started in sort of where the Planning Commission left it in February at 1 space per home.
Okay. Yeah, I thought I remember maybe in the last council work session that one of the reasons was a comment about, we shouldn't have we should just have our parking ordinance and refer to that, and we shouldn't be creating like these bespoke parking ordinances for individual zones, which does, I think that's a good argument. It makes sense to me. I think the reason that we tried to mess with the parking in the first place was I thought that when we were looking at this months ago, that maybe staff's understanding was that a TDM plan was like not available through the SUP. So that's now is available through the SUP.
Yeah. So So the city attorney can come to your rescue. So we did get an opinion from the attorney that there is language in the code that does allow the Planning Commission to adjust parking even in single-use development. Sort of the planning staff's initial read on that was that it wasn't allowable. City attorney came in and said, yes, actually, the way it's written, and you can. And so now applicants for new construction would have access to those sort of parking reductions.
But that potential reduction would occur at site plan, which means the applicant has already done and paid for all of the work that goes into creating the plans that they would bring to us at site plan, which would sort of assume, the project is doable and it would have this much parking. So like how does that work for the applicant if for some reason the planning, I don't doubt that most of my colleagues would support a reduction in parking, but it's kind of a risk, right, for the developer. So is there an earlier point in the process where those conversations could be had? And then sorry, go ahead, and then I'll make another point.
Nope, sorry.
No, you go, please answer.
Okay. So what's contemplated here is actually similar to the way SE projects work, that when applications come in, they identify the parking reduction request. Council sort of reviews that and obviously provides comments and provides guidance on it, right? And council is ultimately approving the development program, and they're sort of accepting the proposed parking reduction. From from a technical standpoint, that actually gets approved as a waiver to the site plan, which is the Planning Commission's approval. But largely, those parking numbers are already baked as part of the SE application. So in this case, parking numbers would be baked as part of the SUP application when council reviews it. You all have an advisory role on those SUP applications as proposed, but formally, you would be accepting those parking reductions at site plan. So it's a similar construction to how the current SE process
So
works.
it would, those kinds of agreements would be made earlier in the process for the applicant? And-
Yeah, it's nothing's done until, right, so zoning entitlements, right, council approves the overall program and the uses, and then you all approve the final engineering and the site layouts, subject to the conceptual development plans that have already been approved by council.
Okay, it strikes me like if the reason that we're, sort of going back to using largely our existing parking requirements, which you didn't really talk about multifamily, but the idea that we need 2 spaces for 2 bedrooms, and only 1 for an efficiency one. And I mean, that's also, I think, kind of ridiculous. I mean, I find all of these requirements completely arbitrary and not very well founded. So I'm looking forward to the discussion that the larger discussion we're gonna be having about parking requirements, but I don't think that's till 2024. So I thought that our original recommendation helped to kind of set these at a more reasonable level. There's nothing to prevent a developer from building 2 spaces for their townhomes. That's totally fine. Just that the minimum is 1. So I personally would really prefer that we stick with the original Planning Commission recommendation. And if the idea is that, we don't want to create bespoke parking requirements, in individual district zoning codes, like we're doing that here, right? You've adjusted the townhouse number from 2.5 to 2. So it's, we're not really doing, if that was the goal, we're not achieving it here. So that's one question. I wanted to follow up on a couple of,
Before you ask that, I see it's 10:30.
Oh,
Do you
shoot.
want to extend here for a bit? By the way, I only have one question, so it's that
I'm
won't take long.
I'm almost done. I think we could, or will we still have
The-
director's report?
Well, we have that too, so.
There's no written report, it's just a look ahead on the agenda tonight.
15 minutes or 20 minutes? We don't have to do it
What do
again?
you think? 15, 20? We'll try for 15, and
All right, I move we extend the meeting time for another 20 minutes.
is there a second?
Second.
Oh, sorry. Did you say 15? Sorry. I just intentionally ignore you. Sorry.
Do I hear 20?
I seconded 20.
Okay, second at 20. So, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? Okay. All right, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I just wanted to follow up on a couple of the comments. Mary Chavez asked about the no residential policy on North Washington. I think this has been talked about a few times, but I think the goal of that is that, we're not saying that you can't have residential, it's just you can't do it through T-zones because those are larger lots and it would make sense for them to go through, a different process, like our normal SE process. So I feel like somehow that is not making it to the community, that sort of understanding of that intention is somehow not making. I don't know if there's a way to clarify that with the language that you use in the report, to explain that a little more fully to the community, because that's a comment that I keep hearing.
Yeah, I think we're hearing that comment a couple times of sort of, if the goal of this thing is to expand housing access, then why is it restricting housing access? And I think the intent that's in the T-zone, and actually it's the same intent section we've been sort of carrying forward since council referred it in May of last year, and it is to provide for a diversity of both commercial as well as residential spaces. And these sort of area-specific restrictions, the commercial uses of no more than 4,000 square feet along Park, that's really based on the small area plan guidance of Park Avenue being this civic grade street that has access to sort of these neighborhood serving uses. So whether that's smaller scale residential buildings than what you'd find on Broad Street, or smaller scale sort of commercial opportunities than what you find on Broad Street. That 4,000 foot restriction is in there because of the small area plan guidance. The small area plan guidance for North Washington, north of Great Falls, is to reserve North Washington Street as a commercial corridor. Today, there's Zone T, which gives them access to commercial uses, and so this really presents no change for those properties under the current T zones, that it's giving them access to the commercial uses and actually expanding the commercial uses is consistent with the small area plan guidance. And like you said, there is still a pathway to provide for multifamily housing along North Washington. That's to pursue a council-reviewed and approved rezoning as well as special exception. But of course, the special exception includes a guaranteed commercial component. And so whether they stick with T zoning or whether they switch over to B zoning, there's always a commercial component included to hold that small area plan consistency.
Kind of struck me as you were kind of guided into a request for rezoning in order to do residential there, because the small area plan, which was written in 2012, did call for the area above Great Falls to be predominantly commercial. That was
right
back in the days when we still had visions of success for commercial buildings, and the whole residential need for residential wasn't quite as prominent then as it is now. Obviously, those things have changed. So it strikes me we could go back and change that small area plan and therefore be able to do residential north of Great Falls Street in a T zone without having to do a rezone. But it strikes me that step would be needed. Am I kind of correct in that assessment?
It is a good practice for zoning to follow planning. And I think once we get to the finish line on the east end small area plan, I think one of the things staff wants to do is to bring to the Planning Commission a sort of a report out on how are we doing against the small area plans, how old are they, how much progress is made, how much have things changed, and work with you all to get direction on, do we want to start reviewing and revising these things, and if so, which ones first?
But I do agree that anything we can do that would clarify that we're not saying you can't put residential in there, or at least the city is not saying that. It's just how you do it is not through a T zone.
Correct.
Yeah, I think a clarification of that. Ms. Chavez also mentioned the arborist comments, and I looked back at the arborist letter, and it's actually very close to our recommendations. I think he was recommending 55% lot coverage by right. We are at 60. So, we could consider whether we want to go down, support his recommendation to lower it to 55. Max lot coverage of 70%, which was also our recommendation. I think the main area of difference is the rear setback. He's concerned about the viability of trees in a 10-foot rear setback. Of course, we're requiring 20 feet by right, but with the ability to go to 10-foot setback, setback through the SUP. So that might be another thing that we want to consider thinking about. I know every area is different. I also think there's the landscaping buffer requirement that is a 10-foot landscaping buffer. Is that correct?
It depends on your adjacent district. So adjacent to an R district, yes, it's 10 feet. There is no buffer requirement adjacent to a B.
Okay. And then, since Mr. Peruz is still here, Mr. Kamalak, sorry, I think that the reason for the step backs is on all street frontages is really more about the pedestrian experience, and the buildings not feeling so tall to pedestrians that are walking on the streets. So that was the rationale for it, I think, when we recommended that, and it would be on not all four sides, but on only the street frontages, correct?
Correct. Yeah, that was my read on the Planning Commission's recommendation as well, as sort of what is the public realm look like so that the building isn't sort of overshadowing the sidewalk or sort of towering over the sidewalk. And so that's the way we've written it up. is sort of that 40 feet on all public street frontages, as well as adjacent to an R district, and then sort of 10 feet further back, you can pop up to 50.
Yeah.
But again, even that 50 is discretionary to the council as part of the SUP process.
You may take another look at that in terms of a corner lot where one of the sides is, doesn't face a residential zone, it faces another T-zone or something else, whether or not a step back on that side. First of all, from an architectural standpoint, does it even make sense to do that? And is it really necessary in terms of the goals and objectives that we're trying to achieve? So I just throw that out as something to think about. I don't have a firm conclusion on it. I'm going to go real quick. The only question I have is on the solar ready and the EV ready. I think it'd be good if you could flesh out some language. I mean, I have some thoughts and ideas, but it may be something you want to get from the ESC. But to kind of give that so we don't just have a generality in what we're looking at. And that's all I have.
Okay. So I had actually noticed the city arborist comments did reflect or did kind of support our original thought process on the lot coverages. And part of it, too, is to reduce the conflicts between the trees and the stormwater facilities. And especially with the new, there have been a lot of conflicts recently with the current conditions. And so I'm in strong support of reducing, coming back to the 55% by right maximum building coverage to increase up to 70% via this SUP, but also for the impervious coverage to be at 70% maximum. And then, at risk of extending the meeting further, I did want to kind of come back to the housing, the TIF. When I voted for that, I was hopeful that I would get a better understanding of how that TIF would be managed, if it was possible. And if, however, the new city attorney comes back with it. If it has to be spent within that same T-zone that is in, I think we might have some difficulty in managing how that money is spent if there's no affordable housing in that T-zone. And then I would support, a way to incentivize, especially on the smaller lots. And I'm speaking again to the decoupling of the T-zones from, North Washington needs to be treated totally differently than Park Avenue, just because of what those two environments are so very different. So I would say that you would have to treat this separately depending upon which zone you're talking about, because you have a much larger, more commercial zone where you have the ability to spend that TIF money if it can be applied, right? But you don't have it if you're over on Park Avenue where you have, very small parcels. So if you incentivized on Park Avenue, whether it be a tax incentivization or something else to that property owner to provide a certain percentage affordable dwelling unit in their development, I would be in support of that in lieu of the TIF if you can't spend the TIF dollars there. Whatever that percentage is, I would defer that because I'm not an affordable housing expert, but I would be in support of incentivizing it in another way on those smaller lots, just to be able to manage that process a little better. Let's see. And then I just had, I was looking through the actual document, and it looks like on Table 3 and at line 1512, there's still references to boarding houses, lodging houses, rooming houses on that chart. So I think we just need to do some cleanup and make sure that what we are proposing is being removed for descriptions, kind of gets through in those tables in the back. Or maybe I'm looking at something very old.
No, so that table applies to the use regardless of which districts it's in.
Oh,
So
okay.
it doesn't
I thought it
appear
was
in
just
T
the
zones.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
And I believe that is all my questions. Oh, on line 750, in the same document, we make reference to, some requirements about having a front door on the street, for each residential unit. I'd like to add a window too. I don't want to just see like a door just to meet a requirement, but something that is a little bit more interactive with that pedestrian experience.
Fenestration, right?
Yes. Well, a window. Something a little bit more transparent. Yeah, so something there. And then I just had a question about line 756, which is, it says, and I just was very confused by the verbiage of it. It says, the Planning Commission may waive, on 751, there's a typo. The Planning Commission may waive, and there's an I missing, or reduce the requirements when reviewing the site plan applications if it finds that. And if you look at letter C, if it finds that the waiver of the requirement would not be substantially detrimental to the health, safety, and general welfare of the community. So what exactly does that mean? Isn't that the building department and the fire marshal purview?
That's boilerplate that applies pretty much across the board in zoning.
Okay, I don't know why you would ever waive. All right, I'll have to think about that further.
Goes back to court cases, I think.
We're saying if we felt it would be detrimental to the health, safety, and welfare, then we wouldn't approve it.
Right, to use sort of an example that was actually already raised tonight is that one of the requirements of a subdivision is that, protect against inundation from flood for both the proposed structure as well as nearby. And so, yes, it's the stormwater engineer on staff that reviews those technical calculations, but ultimately it's the planning commission that makes the decision. So I think it's, where does the legal authority lie versus maybe who's doing the technical analysis, or maybe multiple opinions are being provided, and ultimately it's the planning commission that could say, wait a second, we're not going to grant this waiver, in the decision of the group, it's not going to meet the test.
That's fine. I understand that now. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any final comments before we close this out and turn it over to Mr. Stoddard for his report? Well, first of all, let me ask, are there
Could I
any
just say
questions?
one just really small thing? I think it's clear from our conversation that on certain aspects, we actually need the city attorney, like here, present. And I would just say, again, the Planning Commission in Alexandria, the city attorney was at every single Planning Commission meetings, all the meetings. And I know we don't often have a thing where we really need the advice and opinion of the city attorney, but on the TIF, we clearly do. So, Paul, I would just recommend that at the next work session or whenever this comes back, we actually get, I know she's new and she just got here, but it would be great if she could come. And it's kind of hard to hear the opinion, through the council, to staff, then to us, just have her come here and give the opinion. So I would recommend on occasion we have the city attorney present at
I
our
would
meeting.
support that. We've had the city attorney before show up at
So
planning.
we get to meet her.
Commission
We
meetings,
haven't met her yet. So it serves two purposes.
Yeah.
No, I think she'd be happy to do that. That was actually one of the questions she asked me when we were sort of meeting each other about sort of what is the role of the city attorney in the planning commission, and I did say that yes, on occasion that the attorney has provided written opinions to the planning commission as well as held closed sessions with the commission to answer specific questions and provide advice. So yes, we can certainly get that scheduled.
Okay. All righty. Did we have any planning commissioners' reports?
I have a just very quick question. I was curious about your mention of a window reminded me of this question that I've been meaning to email to you both. I'm just curious about the transparency requirements that we have at Founders Row. I haven't had a chance to visit any of the restaurants yet, but I noticed that the new restaurant has very limited. It's mostly a wall. That's permissible, I guess.
Yeah, so
I'm
each,
sure it's part of the
so there's
style,
a,
but it looks out of place to me.
yeah, there's a
compared with the other-
transparency requirement in the VCs for Founders Row, and it stipulates a minimum transparency. I don't have it off the top of my head, but generally it's, it's probably in the 70-ish% range for the building facade between sort of 3 feet off the ground and 8 feet off the ground, sort of that range that you're probably going to interact with, whether you're 3 years old or 800 years old. And so that's the transparency requirement, and each set of building plans gets reviewed against that requirement, and those are now being reviewed regularly by the zoning office, so they're in the regular chain for review, and I know they're looking at each of those as they go through the process.
So it's possible that they could be asked to add more windows?
So if they meet the requirement, then they've satisfied the VC, and I think they did have a calculation showing that bay met the requirement. I agree with you. I was a little surprised at how much non-window was there,
Yeah, that's
and I can bring that to you.
Thank you.
Yep.
I appreciate that.
I actually second that. Being, on the AAB, we went ad nauseum about having a consistent guideline for the storefront systems, and then the storefront systems were never really shown to us, so we never saw any of that. But I do want to also make a comment with regards to that the materials that they're using are very cheap. They're already oil canning in the heat of the sun. That dark, it's going to just look horrible within a month or two. So, as we get warmer. So I would welcome some more detailed discussion with them about what the requirements are and should be. So if there's something that needs to change, I would support that. Thank you.
Mr. Stoddard, your report.
So my report is brief. It's just the look ahead on the agenda. Mr. Trainer, if you could pull that up.
I can do it.
So we'll bring the East End Small Area Plan, and I think that the intention for that second work session is to bring back to you all a comment response to the things that were raised tonight, and then maybe sort of invite the commission to walk through the plan sort of chapter by chapter, looking at each of the pieces in more detail. And then, let's see, and this May 22nd agenda with council, that may adjust. I think what they're finding is that their agendas at times are a little overloaded. So that May 22nd agenda with council may shift a little bit. I'll follow up with you all as it does. And then bringing back the East End Small Area Plan, hopefully to you all for your recommendations, your formal recommendations to council on the 7th. And then if there is a positive vote on a consideration for first reading on the T-zones, that would come back to you on June 7th as a work session. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Any final words of wisdom? Seeing none, I think we are adjourned.
I've been to role play. Got a banh mi and a nice Vietnamese iced coffee there the other day. Walked over. It's pretty good. It's very small inside, but they have like very little, not really, mostly takeout and stuff. Which one? Role play. Oh, okay.
I've been to the one up at Tyson.
Yeah, I mean it's nice. It's similar, same menu.
Yeah.
It's a very small space inside, but the iced coffee's good.
Yeah, we haven't made it to Ellie Bird yet. It's
So the Vietnamese iced coffee.
on our list.
I haven't been able to get a table there. Every time I look in,
It's packed. That's good.
What kind of food is new? Pretty good. Well, those are all the same place. No,
It's all the same.
It's kind of one restaurant.
I think it's the Chase and Tails guys.
They have like one on Fall Street.
Part of the restaurant.
My son wants to
And they're
go.
sharing like a common
That's too
kitchen.
high of a price for you.
Behind the scenes.
Go somewhere else.
Maybe not Ellybird though, right?
No, Leeward's different.
The other company.
The other three are kind of like